Good evening. Chair calls to order public hearing for Resolution 027-23, Glenwood Avenue petition, annual assessment. Mr. Sandless, Mr. Burke, Mr. Patine. How are you this evening?
Good, thank you.
Whenever you guys are ready.
Good evening, Council President Vincenti and council members. My name is Dave Burke. I am the Chief of Planning and Administration in the Division of Water and Sewer. I would like to extend a welcome to the residents of Glenwood and thank them for attending. I will present a brief overview of the Glenwood-Donegal area sewer petition, and I will also present the results of the Harford County Health Department evaluation of the septic systems in the petition area. Mr. John Resline, the Acting Director of Environmental Health in the Harford County Health Department, is here to answer any related questions. Property owners within the development envelope can petition Harford County for water and sewer service. Water and sewer petitions are covered by County Code 256-6 and Water and Sewer Rules and Regulations, Part 24. Petitions allow the county to approve, design, and construct public water and sewer as a capital project. Final costs are equally shared by all property owners that benefit by the petition project. The project is paid for by annual benefit assessments. The Glenwood-Donegal area sewer petition includes proposed resolution number 27-23 to establish the petition annual assessment and proposed resolution number 28-23 to move the petition properties into the S3 planned sewer service category in the Water and Sewer Master Plan. Our office received a sewer petition request from 10 of the 15 property owners included in the petition. We mailed the ballot package on August 16th, 2022, which include the project costs and a septic system evaluation report performed by the Harford County Health Department. We held a public information meeting with the property owners on September 14th, 2022 at the McFall Center in Bel Air. The ballots resulted in 93%, or 14 out of 15 of the property owners voted yes in favor of the petition. Then resolution numbers 2723 and 2823 were introduced to County Council on May 2nd, 2023. Concurrent with council approval of resolution number 27-23 for the petition, a master plan update is required under resolution number 28-23, which is a routine action. Approval of this resolution moves the petition properties from sewer service category S5 into service category S3 for planned sewer service in 0 to 5 years. This update is required to proceed with the design and approval of the petition contract drawings. This map shows the general location of the proposed sewer project. It is located in the 1500 block of Donegal Road and the 100 and 200 blocks of Duncannon Road. It includes 1,200 feet of 8-inch gravity sewer extension with 15 sewer house connections built to the property line. All construction is within the public road right-of-way, therefore no public utility easements are required. Initial funding for the project is from the County Water and Sewer Fund. The county will be reimbursed by the property owners from annual assessments. We expect $67,500 grant funding from the Stormwater Management Septic System Disconnection Program, which will be used to offset design and construction costs. The design and construction will be managed similar to a county capital project. This slide is a copy of the cost summary sheet provided to each property owner in the ballot package. The important information from this slide is that we have $67,500 in grants that have already been applied to support this project. The balance of the funds will be by the County Water and Sewer Fund for 30 years at an interest rate of 2%. As a result, the annual cost to each property owner is $2,073 per year. Once the new public sewer is operational, the property owners are responsible to pay for the sewer hookup charges, which are $11,839, They're also responsible to pay for their septic system abandonment, as well as their private connection to public sewer. There is a $25,000 grant available for each property owner from the Maryland Department of the Environment Bay Restoration Fund to pay these upfront costs to connect the public sewer and abandon their septic systems. Each property owner must contact the Harford County Health Department to apply for the grant and meet eligibility requirements. Property owners are responsible for connecting to the public sewer within 1 year of the sewer operational. Each property owner was provided a copy of the Harford County Health Department Septic System Evaluation Report for the petition area as part of the ballot package. The Health Department reported that septic systems typically last 25 to 30 years. 13 out of the 15 septic systems in Glenwood are original. They are approximately 50 years old. 7 of the lots are impacted by a stream and located in do not test or wet season soils, and all of the lots are less than 1 acre, which limits options for replacement of the septic systems. The Harford County Health Department concluded that the available land area is limited to install replacement septic systems, and the majority of the existing systems have exceeded their typical useful life. Therefore, public sewer is the best option. In summary, there's very strong 93% support from the community for this petition project. The available grant funding reduces the project cost for the community, and Harford County Health Department is in full support. This concludes my presentation, subject to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Bettine, you want to add anything?
No, thank you. Just thanks for the time.
All right, council, your time for questions. Anyone? Mr. Giangiordano?
Thank you, gentlemen. So how come this has taken so long to implement the sewer program since these homes were built back in the 60s? Did this ever come up before and the citizens didn't vote for it?
No, this has never come up before. The sewer is extended up to just at the intersection of Donegal and Duncannon. So we're just, the citizens need to petition the county for service.
So why was the rest of Glenwood done? This wasn't. I'm familiar with Glenwood. I grew up in Colonial Acres. I know that development. So just trying to find out why that was never done in the whole development, or were they the first homes or last homes, or?
These are towards, Glenwood Road. So I would say probably the way this development was developed, this was probably one of the, earlier portions of the neighborhood. And at that time, public sewer just wasn't provided by the developer. The developer chose to install septic systems.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Bennett?
Do you all have a sense of how many pockets of our community in the development envelope are left in a similar situation of having, either expired or close to expiring septic systems and haven't joined in on public sewer yet, or?
I wouldn't have an estimate of that, but it would most likely be, the older communities that weren't built originally. We could certainly, research that and provide you with that information, but at this time, I don't have that information.
Yeah, I just wonder how many little blotches and blocks of communities aren't even aware of the process, or that it's available to them to seek out to be part of our sewer system publicly rather than continue to have septic. So I was just curious. Do we have record of how old septic systems are in different areas?
The Harford County Health Department does, yes.
Mm-hmm. I was maybe thinking about in the future using that information to do outreach to encourage communities to consider moving from septic to sewer.
Mr. Riley? Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
I'd like to take the time to thank you for the 2.5 hours you spent with me and Aurora going over this so I could understand it in depth. So thank you very much. I appreciate his time.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Mr. Resline, if you don't mind coming forward, please. Just out of curiosity, how much money is left in that Bay Restoration Fund currently?
Well, so it's renewed every fiscal year. So I submitted a request to MDE about a week ago asking for $1.4 million for FY24. How much they award me is you know, I'm at the mercy of the Board of Public Works and other people out of you know, the health department's influence. But with these projects, you know, we do generate a waiting list. Like I have a waiting list of applications right now for FY24 money. The thing with the sewer petitions is there's a bit of a staging that goes on. You know, the administrative action by the council, and then the plan and design. So I think there's flexibility with, you know, the health department, the grant, the county to kind of work on phasing these projects in so that, you know, $25,000 for 15 properties is substantial, you know. So I plan on these petitions in the grants, but, you know, how they connect is usually more of a staggered approach, you know, 1 year connection period versus 15 properties all at once. So if I can, you know, well, it's not really my control, it's the property owner, but, you know, if these things are connecting in a phased approach, it's less strain on the grant that I get, whatever amount that is.
How about when we talk about the abandonment for the septic systems? How much time does the homeowner have to turn that around?
So usually what happens is when the homeowner applies for the plumbing permit to connect to the sewer main, the contractor that is doing that connection, as soon as that connection is made, the septic tank is pumped and abandoned while they're on site.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's almost, you know, simultaneous. And that's one of those things that when I do fund something grant-wise, they need to submit the proof of abandonment, the pump out receipt, and all that kind of stuff before I, you know, disperse the funds to the contractor.
Thank you. Mr. Giangiordano?
Thanks, John. Is it the same amount of funds for both residential and commercial, or is there a different process or different funds for the amount that you request?
Oh, that's a good question. So with respect to the grant, the grant funding has, you know, if you're a homeowner and it's a residential property, the income threshold is $300,000 or more. And we use, you know, to vet that, we look at your federal 1040 at the time you're looking to connect. And we look at the total income line on whatever that is on the federal 1040 form. So if you are a person, and this happens rarely, but if you're a person that exceeds the $300,000 income limitation, the amount you would be eligible of the $25,000 would be 50%, so $12,500. If you have less than that, then you'd be eligible for the full 25. Now, with some of these projects, the tap charges, the bids, and those things, you know, you could potentially come in under the $25,000 threshold, which then, you know, obviously we only cover what the cost is, you know. So, you know, with the prices Dave indicated, if you know, the tap charges, what did you say, $12,000?
That's 12,000.
So if the tap charge is $12,000 and the single house connection is, you know, $4,000 by the low bid contractor, you know, the grant would be covering $16,000 because that's all that would be required. Because the public infrastructure, the sewer main, is being covered by the petition fund.
Correct.
Yeah. So my grant would be looking to cover the septic abandonment, the single house connection to the sewer main, and then the tap charge.
But what about commercial property?
Oh, your commercial, yeah, I forgot about that part. So, so a Maryland small business is eligible for 75% funding. A nonprofit, oh, that one's tricky. I think a nonprofit's eligible for 100% of the allowance if they are a, you know, bona fide nonprofit. A business that would be over the small business threshold, and that's defined in regulation, would be 50%. Most of the commercial ones I've funded have been at the 75% level.
What's the threshold for them to be under that 75%? Is there a income level?
So they make an application to, boy, you always ask these tricky questions. They make an application to a branch of the state where the state evaluates the nature of their business and the employer. I can send you some of that information, actually.
That would be great. I'd appreciate that.
And it explains the process and how they apply and how they're reviewed and what constitutes and defines a Maryland small business.
Okay.
Most of the stuff that I deal with is on the residential side. I've done one or two commercial properties recently that have connected to public sewer.
And when you guys talked about bids, does one contractor do all the hookups for this? So if you've got 14 out of the 15, is one contractor going to do all of the hookups? Or does somebody have to go out and get their own contractors? That wasn't clear.
The private connections, that's up to the property owner. They can hire any plumber they'd like. So it's completely up to them.
Okay.
So to kind of elaborate on that, the tap charge is, something that is just a fixed charge by the Department of Water and Sewer. So they would send me an invoice and I would just pay that to them. And then the private house connection, to be grant eligible, they would have to have 3 contractors bid that work to tie their house into the public service and include the abandonment of the septic. And then the grant would award the funding to the lowest bid of the 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Anyone else?
Thank you, John.
Mr. Guthrie?
Just quick, the estimate, ballpark amount that the homeowner would have to pay to get the hookup.
Like the total amount?
The amount that they would have to pay to hook up to the system.
Our hookup charges for sewer are $11,839, as we estimated for this petition. And what we did with that, we projected that ahead. That's about 2 years from now when we assume that the property owner would connect.
Now, I'm talking about the connection from the thing into the house. That's the number you give me?
Oh, from the public main to the house?
Yeah.
That depends on the length of the service.
Well, I know, but you should know, you could probably ballpark it. I mean, it's those 15 houses, all about the same. And from your experience, what would that number? I ain't holding you anything. I'm just trying to get a ballpark.
I'd have to actually defer to John, because John sees the invoices from the contractors. Our office does not.
All right, John Boyd, what you got?
So it's highly variable, I would say, because I've seen, like for instance, Diodora had a sewer connection a couple years ago where the sewer was in the front of the house and it was a gravity tie-in from the house to the sewer main in the street, and everything was kind of short, and that came in probably like $5,000 for the single house connection. But then there's other ones where
Yeah, that's pretty reasonable.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why the grant requires 3 bids, because contractor costs vary dramatically. Usually, and I hate throwing numbers on something as variable as this, but usually the tie-in from the house to the sewer main, for the most part of the projects that I've done that have been funded through the grant where I've seen 3 bids, they've been less than $10,000 as the low bid, to get that house to the public sewer main and abandon the septic system. Some have been, in the neighborhood of 5, some have been closer to the 10. So if I have to throw a number, I would throw that out as a rough ballpark.
Does that include the water?
No, well, you're talking about the municipal water, public water? No, this is all related to septic
It's all
tie-in.
sewer. It's all sewer line. I mean.
Yeah, right,
And
all
if-
sewer.
and of course you had a couple that didn't vote for it. What would happen if they did not want to hook up?
Go ahead, Dave.
Question for me. So we had one property owner that did not vote. Essentially, they did not submit the ballot. So our policy and the rules and regs require that to be counted as a no. So if they do not, so if council approves the resolution for the petition, the property owner will be required to pay the annual assessment because their property benefits by the project.
So he's got to hook up.
They don't have to hook up, but they are obligated to pay the assessment.
Well, I think if they pay the assessment, they say, okay, I'll hook up.
I said, they're obligated to, they're not obligated to hook up, but they are subject to the assessment because of property benefits.
Okay,
And that's according to county code and rules and regulations.
I think I know what he's gonna do. Maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up?
We do, Mr. President. We have two this evening. James Knott, followed by Sean Carvin.
I'll wait, if not. I'll wait for her to speak.
Do I come back here?
Yes, sir.
John Curtin, 1509 Donegal Road. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, council members. As Mr. Giordano pointed out, the neighborhood's over 50 years old. It is bordered to the north by Colonial Acres and to the south by Patterson Mill. It was never hooked up to water and sewer. There are certain streets that have water and sewer in the neighborhood, specifically the back of Greenway Place and some towards down the end of Duncannon and a newer section that connects with Patterson.
Parsons Ridge.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Parsons Ridge. Yes, those are hooked up, and the gravity goes down, and the line runs right into the Bynum Run interceptor there. At that low point at Duncannon, at the end of Duncannon, the intersection of Rolling. So yes, Colonial Acres does have public water and sewer, and when you look at the water and sewer map, this is one of those blank areas that Mr. Bennett was talking about, that it was just a neighborhood that hasn't hooked up to it yet, and now's probably the time. I do recall my neighbor, Mr. Tapley, attempting to do this at one other time, but I think the street vote was 8-7 and it kind of failed. So I believe the vote now is 93%. I'm sure there was one abstention or one no vote. So all the owners support it and would move that you support it too. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
There are no more speakers, Mr. President.
All right, with no other speakers, this would conclude this public hearing on Resolution 027-23. Hearing's closed, and we'll take it up at another meeting. Thank you. We'll move into Resolution 028-23, Amendment Master Water and Sewer Plan Spring Update 2023.
Just go straight into.
Whenever you guys are ready.
So it may be easier. It's obviously up to you, Council President, but all three of these resolutions are pretty much the same amendment. It might be best to discuss them collectively.
Are we talking about 29, 30, 23? on through?
29, 23, 30, 23, and 31, 23?
Very good.
Okay. All right. Council President, members of the council, Robbie Sandals, County Treasurer, bringing forth some amendments to some existing sewer petitions that were approved by the preceding council. Three areas at Resolution 2923 for Fry's Road sewer petition, Resolution 3023 for Magnolia Road sewer petition, and Resolution 3123 for Woodridge Manor sewer petition. The sole purpose of these amendments is that it removes the requirement that the petition would be financed by a state low-interest loan, and instead, as with the previous assessment we just talked about, the County Water and Sewer Fund will finance this project. It will still be paid for by those assessments, but instead of going out for a loan, we will more or less self-finance that project. And with that, there will be no change in those annual assessments that were approved by the preceding resolutions. And so why are we doing this? A couple of reasons. One, there's cost savings to the petition communities for the final project management, final design, and construction. And a lot of that has to do with when you take money from state programs, it often comes with a lot of strings attached, such as prevailing wages, other labor and environmental regulations, which Mr. Bettine can discuss. So this decision here, by not going forward with that, with those low interest loans and instead choosing to self-finance, we won't be subject to those. We'll also be able to bring all of these individuals in earlier service dates for the new sewer mains. Of course, that means that those residents will benefit by being able to hook up sooner, but also means that the system will benefit by being able to collect all the appropriate hookup charges and system benefit charges and the like, and then start being able to receive quarterly billing from them as well. And then another final reason is that this provides an increased opportunity for local contractors to bid. Again, with a lot of times with those prevailing wage requirements, it does limit the ability of smaller local firms to contract. So again, no change in in what the individual homeowners will pay. It's just a question of how we are going to finance. So instead of financing it from the state, we will finance it internally, and the system will still benefit by receiving those interest payments instead of having to pay those interest payments back to the state.
Mr. Petit?
That concludes the presentation with the justification, so we'll open it up to questions.
You break me up. Council, any questions?
Use the KISS theory.
Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up?
There is no one signed up, Mr. President.
Thank you. This will conclude this public hearing on resolutions 2923 through 3123. The hearing's now closed, and we'll take it up at a later date. I'm going to go back to resolution 2823 because I'm still showing it on my agenda. It says amendments to the master water and sewer plan.
Right, they discussed it, although you didn't call that for presentation, they discussed it during the presentation.
Okay.
That if you approve the sewer petition, that requires the master water and sewer plan to be updated in order for it to move forward and be designed.
Okay.
I think I got that right.
Bill 23-016, Charter Amendment, Term Limits. Mr. Penman.
Thank you,
So
Mr. President.
That hearing's also closed, right, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Penman.
I want to thank those that are here in attendance this evening to provide public comments in the many emails we have received supporting term limits. This proposed term limit legislation is very simple. A council member can serve 3 terms as a district representative. After or before they are termed out of the district, they are eligible to serve 3 terms as council president. In a perfect world, I believe it should be 2 terms, but for the sake of compromise, this bill is for 3 terms. I firmly believe legislators should be a representative for the people, by the people, and not so entrenched in self-preservation of political rhetoric that they lose sight of the real issues of their communities and county. Public offices should not be a career motivated by compensation or benefits. The purpose of term limits is to reduce the power of incumbency and provide new, fresh ideas from the best and the brightest minds in our community. This is why the President of the United States, the Governor of Maryland, and the County Executive all have term limits. The support for term limits is undeniable and supported with bipartisanship across our nation. Those who oppose term limits will say, what if there isn't anyone that's qualified to run as council member once I'm termed out? I find that offensive to think that our communities don't have smart, enthusiastic, civic-minded community members that could do, perhaps, a much better job than we can. Opposition will also say that constituents can implement term limits by voting legislators out. But I also find that distressful because we all know that winning against an incumbent armed with name recognition and large campaign accounts is extremely difficult. Those against term limits will also compare other jurisdictions. I have found many other similar jurisdictions that have term limits on county legislators. I would also offer we should not legislate based on other counties, however, only what's in best for Harford County. Those arguments against term limits will also imply that we don't have a problem in Harford County with long-tenured legislators. I would say that is a matter of perspective. Furthermore, we as legislators should legislate for the future, not the past. One important aspect of this legislation is this decision would not be on the council because legislators have a hard time legislating themselves. This bill would simply allow the voters to decide on the ballot if they want term limits or not during the election of 2024. In my opinion, not allowing the voters to have input on this very important decision is essentially saying the voters don't know enough to make the right decision. With that, that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Council, your turn for questions or comments. Ms. Silas?
Thank you. I agree with Councilman Penman that this issue of term limits is an important one. Being a legislator shouldn't be a lifelong profession, and we've seen what happens in Annapolis and Washington. Our council should be ever evolving, and many of my constituents have voiced strong support for this bill, and I proudly support term limits, so thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up? I'm sorry, Mr. Guthrie.
I just want to add that I've been all over on this thing, and I haven't actually come to a conclusion yet. I have done a lot of checking out people in my area. I know even at Joppatown Edgewood Community Councilman, which Aaron was there, when he started to talk about it, he asked for a raise of hands of who supported term limits, and hardly half the people in the meeting raised their hands. So we have people that are all over the place on this, and if you go back to that meeting 4 or 5 weeks ago, when I gave a estimate on when the subject first came up, I went out and I did some survey on the amount of council members that are up there on the wall, including this council. There was 57 people who've held these positions, since in the history of Harford County. Of the 57 people that held those positions, over 78% of them, 78% of the people who have held this position have only held them for 2 terms or less. 2 terms or less. So you almost have a system already built in. They either lose the position in an election, or they decide not to run again, or they decide to run for another office. So that's the question that I have, because of all the people that don't go for 3 terms. Some of them only do 1 term, many of them. That's the only question I have, and I notice in the entire history of Harford County, only 7 people have held 4 terms. I'm working on my 4th term after I came back. Only 1 person in Harford County history ever held 20 years, and that's Bob Wagner, who just went out in the last election. So it's almost built in when you look at it, just because people want to do something else, and they decide. So, like I said, I'm still on the fence. I'm going to listen to some people speak and see what they say about it. I'm getting a lot of emails that are against it and emails that are for it. That's usually what happens when you have a controversy piece of legislation. And you just have to do what's in the best interest of the county, not your best interest, but the county's best. What is the county's best interest? When you think about that, think about all the people that work in Harford County government who don't get elected. All the people that, a lot of them sitting here, that have positions in the county. When you hire them, do you say, hey, Joe Blow, come in, you're going to be an employee, but in 12 years you're fired? Well, how many people are going to take a job, with that on the line, and telling you that, well, you can come to work here, but 12 years you're gone, or 8 years, or whatever the term may be. So. Because if you're going to get a good employee, I mean, you want to keep them. You don't want to get rid of them. So if you get a bad council member, somebody you don't like, you vote them out in 4 years. So I'm on the fence. I'm going to speak to a lot more people in my district to see what their feelings are. But right now, as far as most of the people I spoke to, and I spoke to a lot of them in my district. They're opposed to it. The majority of them are opposed to it. There's a number of them for it, but I'm finding people that are opposed to it. So with that, I guess I'll see what happens in the people who are going to speak and what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Riley?
I also had the privilege of talking to many folks in my district. One of the things that we constantly deal with in this council is development. And this is a developer's dream come true. I was talking to one of my constituents, and it made so much sense that once you get 3 terms on the council, you really are qualified by the voters. You no longer need that constant residual campaign funds that need to come through, that developers constantly are trying to look for in the 7 folks here on the dais. And so I really would like for everybody on the dais to think about that. Again, we all know it takes money to be able to campaign, and so if you keep having this redundant of folks that come through, the 3rd year, you're out. The developers know somebody else is coming in, and of course, they're going to fund somebody who's going to be in favor. So again, if you think development's tough here in Harford County now, I think if you you pass this bill, it's going to get worse. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Mr. Bennett?
I just want to share, I appreciate the opportunity to hear from people tonight. Some of the work I've been doing is reaching out to the municipalities that are connected to my district, so the city of Aberdeen, the city of Havre de Grace, and hearing the positions of those elected officials to try and get an understanding of how this impacts them and works for them. I'm also interested in reaching out to the other county governments in the state, with the exception of Baltimore City, who just passed term limits. What the trend is counties have introduced legislation to loosen term limits, so to go from 2 terms to 3 terms. I believe it was Anne Arundel County that we saw most recently do that. And so I want to hear from those elected officials to understand, why make that step backwards? Like what wasn't working or what was working? Because, we have to understand beyond the concept, the practicality of it. And then I think the other piece that's in my mind that's a little bit of the elephant in the room is if this bill wasn't to pass through us, there's always the opportunity for a council member to go out and get 10,000 signatures. And so really the other piece that's in my mind is which version of term limits is more appealing to me, the version that would be on the ballot initiative through signatures or the one that would be on the ballot via our vote. Because the other reality of it is when you look back at Harford County election history, no ballot measure, local ballot measure has not passed as far back as 1998. If something's on the ballot, people bubble in yes, or say I don't know and leave it be. So whatever goes forth, I'm confident will pass because of the history of how ballot questions go in Harford County. So it's which version do I want to pass via the people's votes? And so that's the other thing that I'm considering and thinking about as I continue to listen into comments.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Now, Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up?
We do, Mr. President. We have 6 this evening. Major Dunbar, followed by Bill Whalen.
Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Lee Dunbar, 1210 Forest Oak Court, Bel Air, Maryland. I just want to clarify, I'm here as Lee Dunbar, a citizen of Harford County and a strong advocate for term limits. I had a nice little speech written here, but after listening to some of the comments, this has been something that's been a conviction of me for a long time. In fact, even in my undergrad, one of my final papers was to write an argument on constitutional law based on in favor of term limits. And what I've always wondered through the years, and many of you know, I know many of you on the board have been involved in political campaigns, advising, managing, and all that, is why it's an issue. It's because if it's good enough for our president, and it has been for decades, it's good enough for the governor of our state, it's good enough for our county council, our county executive, why is it not good enough for all elected officers and everyone sitting up there? And it's not to say that you don't do a good job, but it should be a calling and not a career. And Mr. Guthrie, you brought up the fact that, well, if you were limited to 8 or 12 years and you were fired, nobody would want to run. Well, that falls flat on its face because the last time I checked, right now, I think we have 9 or 10 Republican primary candidates running for president. And every time we open up for governor and every time we open up for county executive, we have multiple candidates that run. And a lot of people say, well, we have institutional knowledge and we have experience that we don't want to lose. Well, that experience and institutional knowledge should be passed on to the next person. And term limits allows that. And Mr. Riley, you brought up about a developer's dream to have term limits because most candidates have enough money in their war chest. I say that argument falls flat on its face too, because developers, and a lot of them donate a lot of money, I'm familiar with a lot of them in campaigns, is that they donate regularly to all of you and a lot of other politicians that are out there. So they're going to donate to the best candidate, even if it's a new candidate. And somebody that's convicted about development, balanced development approach, which a lot of you are up there, those developers are still going to donate money. So I don't think that's going to be a developer's dream if term limits take place. That hasn't happened anywhere across the state or the country or anywhere else. And we sit there and talk about, you've talked to constituents in your districts, and that's fine, and you should bring those issues. But I think more importantly, bring it to the voters and referendum. That's what I've been talking about. I'm in support of Aaron's amendment, but I prefer 2-term limits. I think 8 years is plenty of time to get your message out to the voters and do what you say that you're going to do. So I think this issue is easily resolved, and we don't really need to do a lot of discussion internally. If you guys want to vote on it, that's fine, but I would prefer to take it out to the voters. And I think with polling that's been out there, here in Maryland, it's 70+% approved it. Baltimore City, for God's sake, question K, they passed it close to 80% of the people wanted term limits. It's a trend, Mr. Bennett, you're right. And it's the right trend, and I think it's the right thing for this county. I think all of you do a great job, and you came in with very little to no experience, but I think there's a lot of other people that would be willing to come in if term limits were there and not have to go against somebody that had $50,000 or $150,000 in their war chest. Thank you.
Mr. Dunbar, your time's up, but I've got to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
You did not mention the sheriff. Do you believe the sheriff should have term limits?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And
Okay.
I think most of you know I have an intention to run for sheriff in the future. That's going to be part of my campaign.
That's why I asked.
Actually, it's a conviction of mine. It will be part of my campaign, but it's been a conviction since I was a young man.
Appreciate it.
2 terms?
2 terms.
Appreciate it. Mr. Whalen, before you start to speak, check that mic and make sure it's on. I just got a text that it wasn't on.
Okay. I'm not playing Joe Cool tonight. I have troubles with my eyes after some surgery. I'm Bill Whalen, 415 Cedar Springs Road, Bel Air, Maryland. I support term limits for council members and still do not believe. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I support them, and I believe that council members should not have the right to deprive citizens of their right to vote either for or against term limits, or even how long they may serve. Let's go back. Bill 21028 of the last administration was to limit council members for 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Rejected upon introduction by the council. I believe that was wrong. In January this year, council members Penman and Ms. Boyles DeSottles announced they would be introducing a bill for 2 full-year terms. 3 council members publicly stated pretty violently that they were against term limits. Mr. Bennett was not part of those discussions. Therefore, 23023 was not introduced on February 7th. Apparently, it was determined there would not be a minimum of 4 votes to get it passed. Now we have Bill 23016, proposes it for 3 full-year terms, 12 years. After that, the candidate could also serve another 12 years. It also proposes, and this bothers me, that no term or part of any term served prior to the election on November 3rd, 2026 would be used in calculating the limitation on the number of terms a council member may serve. Mr. Tony G., I'll just use you as an example. If you were continually elected as an incumbent, you could serve 12 years as council members after having already served 8 years prior to 2026. You would then be eligible to serve 12 more years as council president. That's a possibility of 32 years if elected. Under this thing, I assume Mr. Strohs, Mr. Woods, Mr. Wagner, and a whole bunch of other ones under the bill for 12 years can then come back in and be reelected. Is there a lifetime limit? Based upon the proposed term limits, not starting until after the election in November 2026, if approved by voters, I recommend changing the 3 full-year terms to what it was, 2 full-year terms. And any new members currently serve the council could still serve 12 years based upon this change, but not 16 years as proposed. Bottom line, allow the voters to decide on term limits for council members and for how long one can serve. Voters are still able to select who they want to serve in their district. I was thinking about this. If you want to be creative, the ballot could include circles as they do in for or against. 4 2-term limits, 4 3-term limits, or against term limits. Time will not permit me to provide rationale for support, but certainly Mr. Aaron Penman brought a lot of those to light, as the gentleman before me. I will have a copy of this, and I'm up to my time, but just 3. Elections become less meaningful when a long-term incumbent runs. Longevity in office promotes selective vision of what's important. limiting terms of officials is not a new concept.
Mr. Whalen, please bring
not
your
new
comments to a
Maryland.
close.
And you do get a new diverse group of people.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Benjamin Heiser, followed by Katie Lloyd.
Good evening, sir. Name and address?
Good evening. Benjamin Heiser, 3412 Widows Care, Falster, Maryland, 21047. I'm here tonight to discuss term limits. I did have a speech, but after listening to some of the questions, I think we should just address some of them. Mr. Guthrie, I can confuse a crowd by how I ask a question. If you're for term limits, if you're not for term limits. I can word it a certain way to confuse people, put them on one side or the other. You said that some people were for it, some people were against it. Well, that's a perfect time to throw something on a ballot, right? When you go out to your constituents and they're kind of torn one way or the other, that's when you say, you know what? Hey, look, I represent you all, but I can't represent 50% of you over here and 50% of you over there. Let's go ahead and throw it on the ballot. This is the perfect time to do so. I fully support Aaron Penman's with amendments. I have a few reservations about the amendments, but if that's what it takes for a vote, then that's what it takes. Now, for someone like me, let's say I wanted to run for county council, and the incumbent had 60 grand in a war chest. Why on earth would I want to run? That would just be an absolute waste of my time. Another thing that was said, if you get hired, you serve 12 years and you're fired. Well, that's a little bit different because you're applying for a job and you're only being hired by one person, not by a district, not by a county. So that's also something to think about. Whenever we're torn about a situation like this, whenever we believe that the lines are really towards 50-50 or maybe even 40-60, we should definitely go and just throw it on the ballot. We all may be able to project what it may be. However, that does allow PACs and super PACs to run on certain issues to go ahead and campaign one direction or the other. However, I do think Harford County really does need to get with the times and allow the voters, with the most recent growth that's taken place in Harford County, to allow all the new citizens to decide, should it be or should it not be? Let's go ahead and place it on the ballot. Let's let the voters decide. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
your time.
Good evening, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Katie Lloyd, 312 Thomas Street, Bel Air, Maryland. Thank you to the council for giving me this opportunity tonight. I do understand and agree that we are in need of term limits. It is important for the council to constantly provide new ideas. Any person who qualifies deserves a chance to take office and make a difference. Out with the old and in with the new. Please vote yes to term limits.
Thank you, ma'am.
Greg LaCour, followed by Russ English.
Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening, Greg LaCour, 1820 Park Beach Drive. I have a couple questions also, and if I can direct them to the Councilman B, over in Council District B. You say that there are term limits, okay? And you have your way 8 years. Can you now run for sheriff, county executive?
He's not going to respond to you, sir.
Can't? Okay. I just wanted, because, you said that, sheriffs are going to be limited. I just want to know if there's going to be crossing over. Because as you said, with the developers, this is they're loving it. Okay? Because if you get your 8 years, you already are grooming somebody to come in behind you. And everybody that is giving into your war chest is now giving into theirs. Assumption, which a lot of these people have made here. Okay? Now, you want to go and follow? How many times have you said, you can't answer, Baltimore City, you want to follow Baltimore City? Baltimore City just passed this, and they just made shambles out of it. And just as you were saying, because there's just so many things that I wanted to say, but then Mr. Bennett comes up, and he also says anything you put on the ballot gets passed. So now you got all your PAC money with all these developers, and they're going to nail it. I'm against it, especially if this the way it's being presented. I am against this.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Name and address, please.
Good evening. Russ English, 2619 Franklinville Road, Joppa, 21085. I'm in support of term limitations. I also ran at one time for delegate, and I can really assert with what Aaron is saying. Without a war chest, you really can't go very far at all. When you have individuals that have been in for extended periods of time, they have developed and put in their roots so deep, it makes it impossible to get them out. And I found this out when I went out and actually started talking to all the people within District 7. I found multiple things that occur. Number one, name recognition. Aaron alluded to that a little bit. That recognition is number one and paramount. Without that, you don't have anything. Second thing is, with the war chest, you're able to put out mailers. That is the biggest change that has occurred in the political system. The dynamics of the political system has changed routinely, but there's been a monster change in the past few years. As a child, I can remember sitting on my father's shoulders, holding a wooden, basically flaming torch, a styrofoam hat, and listening at the time to Vice President Nixon giving his speech, giving ideas, bringing it to the people. That dynamic has changed where you don't have those rallies anymore. You don't have anything going out there for the people to listen to. And social media is number one when it comes to getting anything back from our politicians to us, the citizens. Those changes, those ideas that are there are not 100% factual. You can go on and look at all the different ones, and they're actually side by side, one against the other, and they're not what people need to see. The only thing I've seen to come out so far from any of our politicians that makes 100% sense was a self-imposed report card given by J.B. Jennings. And that same piece of paper, he had Lauren Erickson on there, Kathy Shalaga on there, but not Impalaria. He put out everything that was done during that session, all the different bills that came out, everything that came to us. How they voted and who voted for it, making it very simple for the people to see what was going on. This makes a big difference. If you can amend yours, put in a report card from you people to us so we can know what is going on. If you don't see it, you don't take the time to go out and look it up. We have no idea what the council has done, our delegates have done, or our senators have done. But what Mr. Jennings has put out was absolutely great. I'm 100% in favor of term limitations. And unfortunately, Aaron, I'm for a 3-term. The reason is, if you mimic our county executive, which is 2 years, then you turn around and you have the possibility of changing the entire council out at one time, and that could disrupt the government. Putting a 3-year piece in there can make a difference, and it actually allows 1 or 2 people to roll over and keep that basic continuity within our government continuing. So that's the reason I like the three-term limit. So unfortunately, my time is running up, and I have a lot more to go on. I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
There are no more speakers, Mr. President.
With no other speakers, this will conclude the public hearing for Bill 23-016, and we will take it up at a future meeting. Bill 23-017, school bus stop arm camera fees. Mr. Roby. Mr. Gonzalez going to join you?
Yes. Yep.
I see you, sir.
He takes a little longer than me.
He's a big man.
I didn't say that.
I did. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. For the record, Eric Roby, Director of Legislative and Community Affairs for the Harford County Sheriff's Office. To my right is Major Eric Gonzalez. He's the chief of our Patrol Services Bureau. The bill you have before you today, 23-017, is a cleanup bill. Essentially, what this does, when the Maryland General Assembly in 2011 gave the authority for local jurisdictions to enact a school bus stop arm camera program, they made it very clear in the legislation that it would be the district court that actually sets the citation. So not only do they do they come up with the parameters on what is on that citation, but they also set the fee for that citation. In 2014, the Harford County Council adopted 14-030, which set the fee at $125 for a school bus stop arm digital violation here in Harford County. That has, with the county setting the fee at that level, essentially what that did is it took away the district court's ability to set the fee. State law, of course, trumps county law in this case. So what this piece of legislation does is it actually adds in language directly from the piece of legislation that the General Assembly passed in 2011, giving the chief judge of the district court the ability to set the fine for any school bus stop arm camera violation here in Harford County.
Major, you want to add anything?
The only thing I can tell you, if this is of
Can you
value-
pull that mic?
Oh, yes, sir. The only thing I can tell you, if this is of value to you, we've had 876 citations sent to us from the company, with 863 being sent out since February 15th, and that's on about 10%.
It's on 10% of the
Yeah,
buses.
10% of the buses. So I do think there's an issue typically, but it's hard to enforce because we're limited on how many times we can be behind a school bus driving around every day. So I think this would help.
It's actually 20%, sorry. I misspoke.
Well, absolutely. I want to thank you for the conversations that we had leading up to this with the sheriff as well. So, council, open for questions, comments? Anyone? Mr. Bennett?
Have you, since February, had anybody who's gotten a second ticket? Like, people who are repeatedly violating stopping behind a school bus? Because I was just wondering, future, this doesn't have to do directly with this bill, but of having a deterrent for repeated violations. There's some people who might be willing to eat $250 to be unsafe and unkind to children, but if you do it a second time, a third time, there's an acceleration of consequences.
So, Councilman Bennett, I think your question is one that I know was brought up this year in Annapolis during the legislative session. There were a couple bills dealing with stop arm cameras. Unfortunately, the way the state law is written, there's no provision in there that would allow us to go above the penalty of $250. That's the maximum fine that a county or jurisdiction can set. But it certainly might be a good conversation point with the delegation. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe we've had any second violations. I'd certainly have to look at that out of the numbers we've received, but it looks like all of them have been first time. But again, it's only the first 3 months.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Anyone else? All right, seeing no one else, anyone signed up?
We do have one speaker, Mr. President, Bill Wayland.
Good evening, sir.
415 Cedar Springs Road, Bel Air, Maryland. I am for Bill 23017, but I came here mainly because some questions come to mind, and hopefully they can be answered. 100 of the county's 500 buses were outfitted by Angel Tracks in February, and I understand they were paid for by Angel Tracks at no cost to the county or public schools, except 50% of the money is returned to the vendor, and the other half goes to the sheriff's office. And right now, the camera record violations are 125. When I read the fiscal report, and that's what bothers me, the county code allows the 125, and if adopted, the current rate is set by the court as 250. This fine was set in 2014, but the county did not really begin enforcing the camera system till mid-February 2023. It says approximately 600 citations been issued, but some fines were not collectible because the 125 rate in the code is not the rate set by the district court. Assuming the current level of citations at the district court rate, the county could collect approximately $600,000 per year in school bus camera stop arm regulations. Presumably that would go down after people learn their lesson. Why was it not collected at the lower rate? They could have collected $75,000 in fines if you were collected that. Just because it was higher, why? That's one question. If you want me to hold that, I have other ones at the same time. Your analysis states a current level, again, of 250, 600,000 divided by 250 is 2,400 violations, and then, of course, they could go down. My question has to do, what is the approximate cost of each camera? And I've read as much as 2,000. And then, is the vendor eventually going to pay up where there is no additional fee going back to him? In other words, what is the time limit on it if he gets 50% of the fines collected? After a while, he'll be collecting more than what is the cameras are worth. And then the other question is, or how many more buses are needed? Apparently, the 100 were placed in strategic zones. That's kind of.
So, Mr. Whalen, if I may, I'd have Mr. Roby contact you and answer those questions for you.
Who would contact?
Mr. Roby will.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right. Thank you, Mr. Whalen.
There are no more speakers, Mr. President.
Very good. With no other speakers, this will conclude this public hearing on Bill 23-017. Thank you, gentlemen. This will be taken up at a future meeting. Bill 23-018, Pay Plan and Classification Plan. Ms. Stevens, how are you?
Hello, good evening, Council President Vincenti and council members. I am Director Tiffany Stevens, Director of HR for Harford County Government, and I have Nicole Barnwell with me. She's the Deputy Director of HR. You guys should have a packet that you received this afternoon, probably. And if you want to turn to the 6th page is the briefing paper for what we'll be going over. So what I will be presenting is the requested classification and pay plan changes for FY24. You will see that the county executive is proposing in the pay and class plan for 24 that the minimum of each grade be increased by 3%. And then classifications in the LB1 through the CA6 grades be adjusted to comply with Maryland's new minimum wage, which is not effective until January 1st of 24, to the $15 an hour, which is the $31,200. The county executive is proposing 4 new classifications to be created, 6 existing classifications be deleted. In addition, 13 classifications receive a title change only, 1 classification be downgraded, and 2 classifications to be upgraded. The creation of the 4 new classifications results in no new positions, no additional PINs. Those are all created through the budget process. So if you want to turn your page, you will see a summary there that kind of goes over the 4 new classifications, the deletions, the grade changes, and the title changes. And then beyond that, you'll see is the bill, where you will see the salary schedule, which has the old minimum, new minimum. And then beyond that is the legislative draft of the bill. And then beyond that, you will see where we have the alphabetical classification listing. Everything highlighted in yellow is what has been changed. So if you would like for me, I can go through the new, okay. So I will go over the creation of the 4 new classifications. So we have asking for a lead communications specialist, and this is in our transit area, so in our transportation area and their communications area. We are creating an EMS lieutenant. That's to go along with all of the paramedics and EMTs that we have been bringing on board. The Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development due to the name change of the department, and then the Director of Housing and Community Development. You will see the deletions, Litter Control Program Supervisor. We no longer have the landfill. We don't hire people for that area. Public Safety Hazmat Manager. We have consolidated that into one of our other titles that you'll see later down. Recycling Program Coordinator and Recycling Program Manager, again, because we no longer have the landfill. The deletion of the Deputy Director of Community Government and Community Relations, and then the Director of Government and Community Relations, as we no longer have a Government and Community Relations Department. 3 grade changes. We are asking for the administrator to be upgraded, the Chief of Facilities Operations Division to be downgraded to match what the administrator is, as well as most of our other chief positions, and then our EMS supervisor upgraded. Then you'll see the 13 classification title changes. So Chief of Staff to Chief of Executive Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff to Deputy Chief of Executive Staff, Deputy Director of Community and Economic Development to Deputy Director of Economic Development, Director of Community and Economic Development to Director of Economic Development, the EMS Supervisor to an EMS Captain, Public Safety Assistant Shift Manager to a Public Safety Captain, Public Safety Branch Manager to a Public Safety Division Chief, Public Safety Dispatcher 1 to a Public Safety Emergency Communications Specialist 1, and in the series there, we have a 2 and a 3. And then your Public Safety Dispatcher Probationary to a Public Safety Emergency Communications Specialist Probationary. Public Safety Shift Manager to a Public Safety Battalion Chief, and a Public Safety Shift Supervisor to a Public Safety Lieutenant. I can tell you that the name nomenclature for the Public Safety Dispatcher to the Public Safety Emergency Communications Specialist actually came as a recommendation from our MCEA union. And this is based on legislation that was passed down in Annapolis, I believe it was last year, in how they made mention of the titles for dispatchers. So they had put in that request to make that title change. And then the title changes for your public safety positions. Again, that was bringing on all the paramedics and EMTs that we have been brought on to give them levels. That is it for my presentation, but I will answer any questions that anybody has.
Nicole, would you like to add anything?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Council, time for questions? Anyone? Mr. Bennett?
Just in understanding some of these classifications, like I see a custodial worker 1 is LB2. Do we have anybody who's classified as LB1 currently?
So we do, I want to say we probably only have less than a handful.
And what would be some of those positions?
So the position we have is called a laborer, and that's mostly in our DPW division in the highways.
And currently, if you're a new hire without this legislation and one of those positions, your starting salary at minimum would be $21,828 a year as a full-time laborer in DPW.
Yes, we actually have not hired any laborers since I've been here. In the 8 years that I've been here, we've just put that one in the back burner, but we do have people currently in that role. They are not making $21,000 though.
And same thing for LB2. Currently, if you were a new hired custodial staff, the minimum you would be paid is $23,052 a year to be a custodial worker.
According to this plan, yes.
And so this would bring that up by like $9,500. So a custodial worker would be making $32,000 a year as a new hire.
Yes, and as a reminder, we have to bring these up to the 31 to anyway, January 1. So, but currently, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Guthrie?
I'm curious if, when you say the minimum maximum, some of them are more than double, who determines where that person is hired, and once they're hired at whatever wage they're hired at, who determines if they can make the maximum?
We do in HR.
HR?
Yep.
From what, recommendations from?
Based on their years of experience, as well as their education level.
And I guess recommendations from their boss.
It also
Also?
depends on the budget too, so.
Yeah.
Tim only lets us spend so much.
No, but I would expect you would need a recommendation from the supervisor before you gave them an increase.
We do, again, they give us what they have budgeted, and then we use that to gauge where we can hire the person based on the minimum and maximum.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Seeing no one else, Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up?
There's no one signed up, Mr. President.
Very good. Thank you for your presentation. This will conclude the public hearing on Bill 23-018.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bill 23-019, amend 2018 Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan. Mr. Magnus, Mr. Hanley, Mr. Grimm. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, Council President and council members. My name is Paul Magnus. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation for Harford County. I'm obviously joined again by Shane Grimm, the Director of Planning and Zoning, as well as Terry Hanley, Deputy Director for Parks and Recreation. Again, we're here to make a presentation on the 2022 Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan. Again, this plan is required by the state of Maryland in order for the county and for our department to qualify for program open space funding that is made available as part of the program open space program run by the Department of Natural Resources and as administered by them. Overall, our 2022 plan is an update of the 2018 plan as it relates to recreation, natural resource conservation, and ag preservation efforts in Harford County. As we work our way through, there we go. Okay. Every county, again, is required to present a plan by the Department of Natural Resources, and again, it evaluates the demand for parklands and recreation facilities based on need, proximity, and equity analysis, and outlines goals and priorities for our department for the next 5 to 10 years. The plan itself is broken down into 4 chapters. The first chapter is basically the framework which discusses existing conditions, both geographic, physical, and demographic conditions in the county itself. The bulk of the plan is Chapter 2, which is the recreation, parks, and open space portion, which, again, we go through the supply and inventory, our demand and needs analysis, the proximity and equity analysis that is required by the state, as well as county priorities. Chapter 3 is the natural resource and conservation portion of the plan, and Chapter 4 is the ag land preservation portion of the plan, which is administered and put together by our friends at Planning and Zoning, which is why I'm joined by Shane tonight. So again, Chapter 1, just to highlight a few pieces with regards to, again, it's existing conditions. So it's everything from geographic, water features, prime soils, historic development patterns within the county. And then we have, obviously, the demographic information. So again, total population-wise, the 2020 census, the county's population is 260,924. This is a 6% increase based since 2010, the last census. It makes Harford County then, by percentage-wise, the 3rd fastest growing county in the Baltimore metropolitan area. Again, since the 2010 plan, or since the 2010 census, excuse me, the percentage of people living in urban areas has gone up, which is not a surprise because, again, the development envelope is where, as a county, we direct the bulk of our development. The recreation councils with the most growth since the last plan have been Forest Hill, Jarrettsville, Dublin, Darlington, and Belcamp, and those are by percentage as opposed to, mostly by percentage as opposed to absolute numbers. And then the recreation councils that are projected to grow over the next 10 years are Aberdeen, Havre de Grace, Belcamp, Emerton, and Joppatown. As with the 2018 plan, I've been involved with the department the last 2 sets of plans, so I did the 2011 as well as the 2018 plan. We are, as a county overall and as a society overall, getting older, and actually that is very reflected in the information, demographic information with regards to the county, because the largest the largest age group growth is in the 65-plus community in the county. Again, into Chapter 2, we talk about our supply and inventory. Again, what we have now in terms of not only county but also state. We don't have any really federally owned lands, but also municipal lands. We talk about our recreation councils and their programming that they offer, and the phenomenal job that they do to complement our great partnership that we have with them. We discuss water access as well as trail miles and other items. Again, just to highlight a few things, overall from an acreage standpoint, in the county system, we have almost 4,900 acres of county parkland. Again, we have 324 acres of municipal parkland, and then there's over 7,000 acres of state parkland between Susquehanna State Park, Rock State Park, and the Gunpowder. We do, as a result of the joint use agreement that we have with the school system, we are allowed to count a portion of the Board of Education sites towards our acreage. And so based on that percentage, we are able to include 1,800 acres basically at Board of Ed sites. Again, we have 8 activity recreation centers in the county. We have 2 nature centers, the baseball diamonds and softball diamonds throughout the county. Again, as a department, we are responsible for maintaining all of those ball diamonds, whether they are at county park sites or whether they at public school sites. We have basketball courts, both indoor and outdoor. I would make a note, as an example, with the indoor basketball courts, again, as with the 2018 plan, 90% of our indoor basketball courts are with the school system. So while we do enjoy, obviously, that great partnership with them through our joint use agreement, it also means that we have to work around the school system's scheduling of their facilities. We have 8 volleyball courts, over 46 miles of trails, 17 sites with water access. I see tennis courts on this one. Trust me, when we do the next version of the 2027 plan, that will include information about pickleball. Again, as part of our plan, we're required to include public participation, as we did with the 2011 plan and the 2018 plan. We put out a public survey, this through SurveyMonkey. We had over 1,600 responses. This is actually almost 400 more responses compared to our 2018 plan, and over more than 600 responses compared to our 2011 plan. We ask a series of questions with regards to nature programming, senior citizen programs, therapeutic recreation, general information about park visitation, sports programs, overall participation, what survey respondents want to see as facilities that we should consider in the future, as well as future budget priorities. In addition, the draft plan was presented to the Environmental Advisory Board in March of 2022, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board in March of 2022, and our Recreation Council presidents at their March 2022 meeting. The final draft of the plan was then made available through the county's website in the month from February 17th of 2023 through March 15th of this year. Again, some of those takeaways from that public participation, you can see that 96% of the people have been at a park within the past 5 years. 45% of the people have participated in nature or sports programs, whether through our department or whether through one of our Recreation Council partners. And popular activities include walking and biking on paved and unpaved trails, as well as enjoying nature and playgrounds. Takeaways also, again, when we talked about budget priorities, people identified the desire for more paved and unpaved trails, recreation centers, access to fitness, canoeing and kayak launches, as well as pickleball. Top budget priorities, again, were walking trails, activity centers, land acquisitions, playgrounds, and other park amenities. Overall, there's a high level of satisfaction with our facilities and our programming based on the survey results. The state, again, back in 2018, the state implemented a proximity and equity analysis. So what that requires for us to do as part of our overall system is to basically take all of our park sites and all of our public recreation sites. We, again, partnered with our friends at Planning and Zoning using GIS mapping that allows us to then look at proximity analysis. So within the development envelope, we use a half-mile area around each of those sites. Outside the development envelope, we use a 5-mile radius around those sites. Again, that equates to roughly a 15-minute driving time. Our maps were also created for the following facility types as required by the state, including sports fields and courts, recreation centers and gyms, trails, fishing and water access, playgrounds, and picnic areas. The state also then wants us to take that information and do what they do an equity analysis. So every census tract in Harford County was rated by the state based on these factors you see here, including proximity to public park space, concentration of children under 17 as well as adults over 65, concentration of low-income population, overall population density, the concentration of non-white population when compared to the state average, the concentration of linguistically isolated populations, and the walkability or limited access to transit. And each of those census tracts was provided a score, and the higher the score, the higher the priority in that equity analysis that individual census tract is considered. As part of the overall needs analysis, again, Harford Next identified a 30 acres per every 1,000 county residents as an overall goal as part of the master plan process. In this LPPRP, as you can see, based on the acreage that is available in the population, we do meet that goal of 30.1 acres for purposes of just future consideration for acquisitions in order to maintain our acquisitions of the 30 acres per 1,000 residents. It gives you an idea over the next 10 to 15 years of how much land, again, as a department, we would need to add to our Parks and Recreation system. Again, as I mentioned before, the state, with the proximity analysis, this is the visual representation, basically, of that analysis from our overall, this is all of our sites that are within the development envelope. Outside the development envelope, as you have seen if you've looked at the plan that was sent to you, outside the development envelope, we are, from a proximity standpoint, meeting the needs because all of our facilities fall within a 5-mile area and a 15-minute drive. It's inside the development envelope where we see challenges for our future in terms of where we need to focus our efforts. Again, as you can see in this visual representation on the map, we're talking about areas of Joppatown, as well as Fallston near Route 147, portions of Forest Hill and Hickory Fountain Green, Emerton, Belcamp Perryman area, Aberdeen, as well as Havre de Grace. As I mentioned before, with the equity analysis, again, this is the visual representation of those overall scores based on the census tracts. Again, as you can see, the green is areas that have a low priority in terms of the equity analysis. Again, the red, and as you work your way up the color scale, you can see the red are the areas that have the highest priority in terms of equity analysis, the highest scores. Again, as you can see from this, there are areas, the greatest need for parks and recreation facilities based on equity analysis would be in Edgewood, Belcamp, Aberdeen, as well as eastern portions of Havre de Grace. At the end of the day, what we then do is take all of that information, and again, the visual representation on this map here shows all of that information together. Again, you can see based on that, we have areas of need within Bel Air, Joppa, Emerton, Edgewood, Belcamp, and Havre de Grace. So as we make decisions with regards to our annual budget as well as our capital improvement plan, and we have questions about the priority with regards to competing projects, this is one of the tools that we use in order to make a decision as to what order in which projects get funded. Again, the county recreation goals are very similar to the ones that we set previously. It's the acquisition of additional recreation land, including waterfront properties, to help meet the needs of current and future residents, developing integrated greenway, land, and water trail systems with both public and private segments, monitoring usage trends, including existing and improving existing facilities, as well as developing new and complementary facilities that add additional recreational opportunities to meet the needs of all segments of the county population, as well as support the destination recreation sports tourism market, provide active and healthy lifestyle opportunities for Harford County residents. We also, again, I mentioned our Recreation Council partners. We work with them to continue to address safety of recreation program participants as well as overall county residents. An example, and that would be we've worked with and partnered with the Department of Emergency Services and will continue to partner with them over the next several years to put what I will call publicly accessible AEDs at county park sites so that if there is a medical emergency at a park site, you would call 911. The dispatcher will give you the code as to that you would put into the lockbox, and that then gives that individual access to the AED inside the box, and they can then take that to help address the medical emergency situation until EMTs are able to arrive. We also incorporate sustainable development and conservation practices within all of our parks and recreation facilities and incorporate technology as part of our park sites and facility experiences. Before I turn it over to Shane, I just wanted to hit a few items with regards to our accomplishments as a department since the 2018 plan. The Ma and Pa Connector Trail, we've completed segments 1 and 2. We are actually hoping that we got word earlier this week from State Highway Administration with regards to segment 3. So we're moving into the next step with regards to that project and look to have it out to bid later this year. We developed Emily Bayless Graham Park a passive park site in the middle of the development envelope. That includes 1.9 miles of walking trails, a sensory trail, as well as related parking. We worked with partners with the Miracle League to create a Miracle League baseball diamond over at Shucks Road Park, as well as we installed a sensory trail there as well. We've done themed playgrounds throughout the county, including Alfred B. Hilton Park, Fox Meadows, and the Churchville-Glenville property. We completed a feasibility study, as well as started to develop the Deer Creek Watershed Trail. We've continued with our synthetic turf field replacements projects. We worked with our partners at the Department of Public Works on watershed protection and restoration, including a pervious parking area at the Anita C. Lake Estuary Center. We've done LED lighting upgrades at the Emerton Rec and Tennis Center. And while it's not part of this discussion and will be part of our accomplishments in the 2027 plan, we recently completed LED upgrades to the parking lot lights at Cedar Lane Park. I mentioned earlier about the outdoor AED units at 7 county park sites currently. We've moved our registration of our department programs completely online, as well as we're moving our pavilion reservations to the online system. Kudos definitely go out to our department staff on the recreation side, in particular during the COVID pandemic. They developed a program called At Home with Parks and Recreation that we use to encourage, it's a video library, basically think of it as YouTube, where we encourage people to stay active and healthy during that time. We actually won a National Association of Counties award for that program. We developed a department Facebook page that has improved engagement with the public. One of the examples I will use in May of this year, we had over, Facebook uses what they call reach, which is if you see a post and you share it, it's how many other accounts then ultimately see what you've, then they share it. Ultimately, what is seen by those on Facebook. In May of this year, May of 2023, we had over 250,000 reach in terms of the shares that occurred as a result of our Parks and Recreation Facebook page. With that, I will turn it over to Shane to discuss the natural resource and the ag preservation portion.
Thank you, Mr. Magnus.
Good evening, Council President and council members. Mr. Magnus asked me to be here. He said he needed a pretty face to sell this, so that's naturally why I'm here. But just wanted to say that...
Didn't have to shave either.
What's that?
Didn't have to shave either.
That's right. We work closely with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and certainly during the Harford Next planning process several years ago, we worked with Department of Recreation to come up with goals and policies that would then influence Department of Parks and Recreation goals and policies which go into their LPPRP. So we're always working closely with them to make sure that our two plans are in a line. Now, Harford Next, when we did that several years ago, we folded a lot of plans into one plan. Unfortunately, LPPRP, because of the requirements, it has to be a separate plan, but it is part of the suite of plans that are covered under Harford Next and is influenced by Harford Next. So the goals that Mr. Magnus and his staff have pulled out are consistent with those that are found in Harford Next under our Natural Resource District section, specifically with strengthening our commitment to preserving natural resources, and certainly things like the green infrastructure plan that we did previously. Those types of things will help to influence the decision-making in Parks and Recreation as well as planning and zoning. And certainly with our commitment to preserving sensitive resources and also improving those resources goes hand in hand with our program to use developer funds to plant properties, and we work with Parks and Recreation on things like that. And certainly, if you recall, this year we were at Shucks Road Regional Park by the Miracle League field planting there. So we work hand in hand with them to do those types of things, to continue to improve upon the natural environment, and also work to check off those goals and objectives in Harford Next as well as in the LPPRP. And secondary to that also is a chapter on land preservation. And obviously land preservation is very important in Harford County. And I'm pleased to say that through the efforts of previous county administrations, this administration, as well as our agricultural preservation coordinator and staff, we have been able to preserve 62,500 acres of farmland in this county through various programs. And we are continuing those efforts, and in the coming months you will see specifically as you move into the fall session, you will see more farms come in front of you for approval so that we can continue to increase those numbers to meet the goal of 75,000 acres that was put in Harford Next as an ultimate goal for us to get to. So we're closing in on that. And each year, I think if I recall correctly, we're preserving approximately, on average, of last few years, about 2,000 acres a year. So we will definitely meet that goal in the coming years. And of course, we appreciate the support of Parks and Recreation in our efforts with land preservation, and always appreciate the support of council when we bring ag preservation parcels over for your consideration and approval. So just to wrap up from the Department of Planning and Zoning's perspective, we are here to support the Department of Parks and Recreation and continue to work with them on a day-to-day basis like we do to ensure that our plans are consistent and that we were helping them to meet their goals in their plan as well.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Gentlemen, anything else? Council?
For questions from the council.
Mr. Penman?
Thank you for your presentation. I really don't have any questions, just, I know I mentioned it the other day, Annie's Playground, you guys did a fantastic job on the new playground, upgrading it, and the other facilities across the county. So thank you for your efforts and your expertise, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Mr. Guthrie?
I promise not to go over my whole bucket list.
He did that yesterday.
Well, there's a couple things. Sure. I just want to thank you for the outstanding effort all you guys did with Mariner Point Park when you brought all your people over to clean up the people and drop it down where I live. They're very grateful, and they've commented, a lot of them walk every weekend, and they said it really looked great. So I want to thank you for that. Since we mentioned pickleball a couple times, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in. You know, we had, our seniors, is that off or on? Larry? Our seniors in Edgewood are still complaining. Some of them did last night at our community meeting to me, one-on-one after the meeting, about the pickleball that we had in Edgewood, and now we don't have it now because I think we lost the trainer, or we lost the person who was putting it on, whatever. And I just wondered, do we know what's happening about trying to get the pickleball restored in Edgewood?
Well,
at the community
it's not
center?
that it's not there. It's we changed
Oh,
the
it's
way.
there, but we don't have.
We changed the way that we run the program.
Right.
Whereas previously, we were basically running the program Monday. When you registered for it, it was for 4 days, and some people showed up some days, and some people didn't show up other days. What we changed about the programming is we looked and said, we're going to register, we're going to have a Monday, we're going to have one each day. And what we found from that is actually we've had a greater level of participation overall in terms of the number of participants, because you're getting people who wouldn't necessarily, who would look and say, well, I can't make 2 of the days, so I'm not going to register. Now they're saying, oh, okay, I can pick the 2 days that I'm going to be there. So we do offer it. It is a little bit different than what Office on Aging offered it when they had that program working through our at our location in Edgewood. But I can also tell you in general that the pickleball crowd in Harford County likes to travel because we have folks who play at one location on Monday and a different location on Tuesday and a third location on Wednesday. I mean, they will go where pickleball is available.
Travelers.
There you go.
Okay. All right. I'll go over there a couple days and check them out and make sure they understand. Can you give me an update on the Long Bar Harbor equipment, the equipment down there, just for everybody's notification down at the Long Bar Harbor where we have the kids' entertainment and swings, all that kind of stuff. We had this crazy thing going on where the bolts kept breaking in the equipment, and nobody knew why. And we kept looking for spaceships that were coming down or whatever heck was causing it. But they sent over there and they repaired all the equipment, put all new bolts in it, and they all broke again, correct?
A number of them did.
Number of them
So
did.
a little bit of history there. We replaced that. That playground we put in place about 4 years ago. Other than routine maintenance, did not experience any issues until this January, when our maintenance staff went out to do their annual assessment of the playground before we get into the spring season. and they found that a number of the bolts had actually broken, and we were not sure why. So we worked with the playground manufacturer and installer. Initially, they thought it might have been a bad batch of bolts, so they came in and replaced the bolts. We still experienced some of the bolts breaking again. So what we are currently working with is actually we have one of our on-call engineers. They were actually out there today and will be back out again, I believe, on Friday of this week, doing some survey work to see if there might be a shifting that's some uneven shifting that might be occurring in the ground itself as a potential cause of that situation. But we are, again, just as anxious as the community is to get that playground back to where it is safe for use. And I will personally tell you, as the father of a 4-year-old, I use the gauge of, would I let my son Ben play on that playground? And if the answer is no, then I don't feel right letting anybody else let their children or grandchildren play on a playground.
So you don't have a determination. People call me and say, when's it going to open back up? And I said, well, they're kind of.
We have to figure out
I told them
what-
some of the things you just told me, so that's.
So we have to figure out what we think the root cause is before we know what our next steps will be. But we are anxious to get it open and safely open as soon as we can.
Okay, one last one for today.
Sure.
The LED lights, because I took Terry up to Copenhagen Park, and I took the county executive up there also, and half the lights are out of the floodlights on the field, and they can't replace them because they're old, and so the county executive said, and Terry also, about we're going to upgrade all the lights to LEDs. Do we know where that's at?
We're going to look at that and see. I don't know specifically where that is at the moment, but we are already looking at that
Okay.
in terms of just in general. Again, at all of our facilities, because one of the other advantages, particularly from a field light standpoint with LED, between the LED lights and the way that what the Night Skies initiative, and if any of you council members want to drive by Cedar Lane Park as an example, that is a site now that has the LED lights. They are Night Sky initiative, and basically if you are about 15 feet off of the field, you're in the dark. The way those lights are the way the directional effect of those lights are.
Well, we appreciate it. Get it done as soon as we can, so they get ready for the fall stuff.
Very good.
Be here before we know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Jan Giordano.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you for the presentation. Probably not a question that pertains to this, but is there going to be any permanent facilities at Cedar Lane Park for bathroom?
That is one of the things we're discussing with them in terms of a long-term.
Discussing with who?
Cedar Lane Sports Foundation, because we work with them, we work in conjunction with them in terms of capital projects.
Okay, so, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jan Giordano. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up?
There is no one signed up, Mr. President.
I want to echo a lot of the comments that you heard here this evening. The citizens absolutely take advantage of the programs that you have, the service that you provide. It adds greatly to the quality of life here in the county. Appreciate all you guys do.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate all your staff, your whole entire department. Thank you. This will conclude this public hearing and will be taken up at a future meeting. We're going to roll right into our general meeting if we can. I'm going to call to order our legislative session day 23-019. I would ask you to please join us for the pledge, followed by the opening prayer by Councilman Guthrie. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we bow our heads, we want to honor it as D-Day. This is the anniversary all the way back in the 40s. Had a grandfather, stepfather who was in that war and landed in Anzio, and he had a lot of good stories from here over the years. But anyway, I'd like to give this prayer out to all our service people. Lord, we ask your blessing for our soldiers overseas and proudly serve our nation, who proudly serve our nation. We thank you for this period of service which they gave. as this could be the best years of their lives. We extend thanks for the friends that have gained during this lifetime and ask for the strength to temper our mournings for those who have passed on. By celebrating their lives, which by touching ours have enriched us far more than material wealth. We will recall pleasant memories of those serving, knowing all are serving in military forces serve to none, second to none. Lord, how blessed we are for the men and women of our U.S. military, Guard, Reserve, and regular all volunteers that you have given our nation to fight a foe that cloaks murderous actions under the disguise of religious acts. Lord, bless the United States of America and all those who serve her, and bring our troops home safe and sound and soon. Thank you, Mr. President.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Council, if I may, I'd like to take a minute to recognize Maryland State Comptroller, Ms. Learman, is in the chambers with us this evening. Ms. Learman, if council has no objection, I would like to move to agenda number 6, so Ms. Learman can move on.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
I've never been here before. It's very exciting. It's beautiful chambers. And thank you so much for having me, Council President, and thank you for allowing me to jump the line a little bit. I appreciate it. As you said, I'm Brooke Learman. I'm the 34th Comptroller of the state of Maryland, elected in November, sworn in on January 16th. I've spent a wonderful day in Bel Air, touring businesses, meeting with your county executive, meeting with other community leaders, and certainly throughout the campaign spent a great amount of time in Harford County. I live in Baltimore City with my husband and 2 small children. By training, I'm a disability and civil rights attorney. I was a legislator representing part of Baltimore City, South and Southeast Baltimore for 8 years, serving on the Appropriations Committee, chairing the Joint Committee on Pensions, and founder of the Transit Caucus to help promote additional transit opportunities throughout the state, including up, of course, through Harford County. So I'm here tonight and really appreciate your time. Just talk with you a little bit about the Office of the Comptroller. We are very focused in my administration on building partnerships with our local leaders and community leaders across the state of Maryland. For that reason, we have created a new position of Intergovernmental Affairs Director in our agency, and I'm so delighted to have Eve Schuman with me, who is our the agency's first ever IG Director. So she can be a point of contact. Of course, you can always reach out to me, but you're also welcome to always reach out to Eve with any questions, whether it's about revenue estimates or constituent services or tax refunds not coming fast enough, or audit issues. You can reach out to Eve, and she can help make sure that you get to the right person in our 1,100-person agency, the right person who can help you and help your constituents. So the Office of the Comptroller in Maryland is a very unique office in America, actually. I'm the only statewide financial officer who has the duties that I have. No other state comptroller or state treasurer also has the other person's duties and also does revenue administration. So it's really interesting. It's a really interesting position. I'm thrilled to be in it. So 3 things just to keep in mind about the function of the agency. So first and foremost, the Comptroller of Maryland is the elected CFO of the state. The Constitution says that the Comptroller of Maryland oversees the general superintendence of the fiscal affairs of the state of Maryland. That's a fairly broad mandate, and means, not just thinking about how the decisions that we make today affect us, but how the fiscal decisions that we're making today affect our kids and affect our grandkids, and really setting our state up for success, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next 40 years to come. So that's first and foremost one of the things that I am focused on. Every dollar in and every dollar out of the state of Maryland goes through our office, through the government, in the government. Second, of course, as comptroller, I'm a member of a number of boards. If you can, you've heard of alphabet soup, so many different combinations of letters, so many different boards in government, state government. The two, of course, that you're probably most familiar with are the Board of Public Works. The governor, the treasurer, and I sit on that board every other Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. You can watch us tomorrow on YouTube, approving or denying money for our program open space dollars, which of course help fund the parks that you were just talking about, which are so important, transportation projects, state highway projects, MARC and MTA services that I believe you have 2 MARC stations here in the county. So a huge array of contracts. And then there's the State Retirement and Pension System Board. I'm the vice chair of that board. We have 415,000 state employees and retirees who are members of the system. We oversee $65 billion in assets, and I'm so pleased to have somebody from Harford County on that board with me. Third, the third function of the comptroller is one that most of you are familiar with, and that is that I serve as the revenue administrator, which is a nicer way of saying tax collector. So I've adopted that terminology. And of course, last year we processed 3 million tax returns, thousands of sales tax payments, and a variety of other taxes, including most of your local taxes. We currently have 11 field offices around the state. Right now, one of the holes that we identified really is Harford County. So in our planning for the future of our 11 statewide offices, we are looking, really Harford County is the first on our list where we'd like to expand to. So it is my hope that within the next year and a half or so, we will be opening an office in Harford County. And it's great to have, taxpayer services division here who can help your constituents. Every day this year during tax season, we received 800 emails, 2,500 phone calls, and scheduled 250 in-person visits through our 11 offices. So just a phenomenal amount of work that the agency has to do to try to keep up with. So those are really the building blocks of the job. And some of our core priorities that I want to share with you briefly sort of go around three different priorities. First is we are focused on implementing critical agency-wide improvements to help make government work better. At the end of the day, that is really what it's all about for me, is making sure that government is working well so that it's removing barriers to success and creating opportunity for our Marylanders. That means that we're focused on building a great team. We've reorganized the leadership structure in the office, brought in new leaders throughout the agency, including not only our first IG director, but the agency's first ever chief information officer, CIO. And part of the reason we desperately needed a CIO is because in addition to building the team, we've got to build the tools. The technology in our agency is hopelessly outdated. We have the oldest state accounting system in the nation right now in Maryland. We have a tax processing system that runs on COBOL, and our employees sit behind green screen computers. So there is a huge amount of work to do. Our website is also a static website. We'll never be able to keep up with the 800, phone calls and 2,500 phone calls and 800 emails. And so we have to build a better website so that people can help themselves. So that's one of the things that we're really focused on, is modernizing the agency so it can work better for Marylanders. Second, we are focused on ensuring that the resources and expertise of the office create opportunity for and make a positive impact on Maryland families, communities, and businesses. So that means using technology to increase transparency on state spending and the state procurement process, including payments to state vendors and contractors, ensuring that the office is using data to drive decision-making, and then using that data to create reports that inform policy decisions, and hopefully that will be helpful to you as well. So one of the first reports we'll be creating is a State of the Economy report that will get to you during the fall, so that you can see sort of how Harford County stacks up to the state and how the state is stacking up versus our neighbors. We're also focused on engaging in robust public engagement. to connect families, communities, local governments, and businesses across Maryland with services like filing taxes, accessing state tax credits, obtaining legal guidance. So one of the things that Maryland has never done that other tax agencies do around the state is provide free business legal advice. So, for instance, if you're a business owner, and maybe you have a tax lawyer, or maybe you can't afford one, but you are wondering how you have this unique situation, fact situation, and you don't know how the tax law affects your fact situation. After we have fully launched our legal division, you will be able to write to the Office of the Comptroller and get a binding legal decision called a private letter ruling on that fact scenario that you can then rely on. That's so important as a business, to be able to get that tax advice that you can rely on so that you know that you're paying what's owed and you don't have to worry about being audited ever down the line. And then finally, we're working to ensure that Maryland is well positioned for responsible long-term economic growth and success. So just a couple points in that is we're focused on modernizing and simplifying Maryland's tax collection process, closing the tax gap so that those with complex assets pay their fair share. Also making sure that we're enhancing equity in tax administration by analyzing data on audits and the uptakes of various tax credits. We know that there's hundreds of thousands of Marylanders who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit who aren't claiming it. And that's thousands of dollars that could be going to those families to help them pay for summer camp, to help buy a new car, to get to their community college, to take classes in. I recently met a woman who did just that. She got the EITC after finding out that she qualified for it, bought a car, went to the community colleges and got classes, and now she makes so much she doesn't qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is the goal, right, to help build prosperity in the state. So we're also focused on evaluating climate impact and the sustainability of our state spending. So when you build a new school, right, we want to make sure that we're not building it in a floodplain because that's a very poor use of our state tax dollars if we have to go back and figure out how to mitigate all the flooding and the water that it's taking in. And we have to also make sure, that our investments are wise as well. So I'm really excited about the work that we're doing in the Office of the Comptroller and wanted to make sure to come by to share some of this information with you. This, I hope, is the beginning of the conversation and not the end. I want you to know that we're always here for you to answer questions, and we really do look forward to working with you to build a better Maryland. So thank you for having me tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for your presentation. Eve, I wish we had your number a couple of weeks ago. We had 1,000 of questions that we could have sent to you during our budget work session. So I know that several of our council members have questions, so I'm going to just open it up to them. Mr. Penman, if you'd like to start.
Comptroller Learman, welcome to Harford County, and thank you for being here. Eve, welcome as well. This is my first term, and this is my first budget, and so I'm jumping in the deep end and just trying to understand everything. Our treasurer, Robbie Sandless, is here as well, and he's, through the budget cycle, has tried the best he can, tried to provide us with the understanding of what's going on. So, but there is one particular question, series of questions that I have, and it really kind of relates to the local reserve allocation. If you look at the income taxes coming in, there's a portion of that that's kept for the local reserve. So my first question is, what is the formula for the portion that's kept with the comptroller's office for the allocation?
Sure. So we pay out the local share in an estimated fashion. So for instance, if Harford County was 5% of all tax collections in the last full tax year, then you get 5%. So it's all allocated, all of our allocations are based on the past completed tax year.
So I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. So each, like for instance, last year we roughly received $330 million in income tax, and we actually received probably back initially $299 million roughly.
Right.
So of that $31 million that was kept in the allocation, when is that dispersed back to the county, or how is it dispersed back to the county? And is there a system in place for that?
It's dispersed. So the first thing to remember is that you always get all of your money. You always get all of the money that's owed to you. when we get money, so how the system works is when we get money, we get it from a variety of different sources, but most of it is from withholding and estimated tax returns, right? So how we take in that money is we don't know how to attribute it, but we want to not wait to give it to you because we do distributions quarterly. So I find it helpful to think of this on a very granular level. So for instance, there's I think 4 ShopRites in Harford County, but then there's 5 elsewhere around the state. Well, every week or month, or I think it's every week, ShopRite sends all of the taxes that they withheld from all of their employees to the comptroller's office, right? They remit all of that money to us. We have no idea at that point who that money was earned by or what counties they live in, right? So it could be that Sarah Smith, who is an employee at the Bel Air, right, or Forest Hills ShopRite, is a piece of that, but we don't know that yet because it all comes into us and there's just no way for us to know that. So we take in all of that money, and then quarterly we distribute to you before we know where it should be attributed to, before we know where Sarah Smith lives, right? We are giving you her withholding money because we give it to you quarterly. We hold back a small piece of it because we're not sure where everybody lives yet or where to allocate it. We won't know that until they file their tax returns, right? And then we know, oh, Sarah Smith lives in Harford County, like we're all set. We sent that out, or we held back a little bit. Now it can go to Harford County. Next year, it turns out Sarah Smith has moved to Baltimore County. Well, we sent that money to you, or if we didn't withhold a little bit and we sent too much to you, we'd have to take some back and then send it to Baltimore County, right? So rather than having to take money back at the end of the year when we're doing the reconciling, we withhold a little bit up front, and then at the end, when we do a reconciliation, we make sure it all gets out. Does that make sense?
It makes a whole lot more sense than
Okay.
I had a handle on it before.
Okay.
But, so at the end of the year, that money gets dispersed if they live into the county. But it looks like just going over the cycle each year, it's been growing in that fund. And I think there was 147 million in that fund as of this last fiscal year. So you're saying that 147 million, while it keeps growing, is going to be dispersed back into
Yes.
the county income tax?
Always will get all the money that's attributed to your taxpayers. We don't hold any of it back.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the bottom line is we don't have the authority to, right? We couldn't hold it back even if we wanted to, but we don't want to. So you always get everything that is owed to you. And I'm guessing that you got that dollar figure from the ACFR, which is just a sort of required point in time, like snapshot that's taken of the reserve account. And it's the amount of funds that we've collected that we think we will eventually owe to a county at that exact moment in time. And so the next day, that number could have changed because we had figured out where it could go because more tax returns have come in. I mean, I think that's another thing to keep in mind too, is that not everybody files a tax return by April 15th, right? People are filing tax returns all year, and so we're learning. We might not have learned on April 15th that Sarah Smith moved to Baltimore County. She might have filed for an extension, so we don't learn until July, right? But then we see in July, oh, she moved to Baltimore County, so that goes to Baltimore County, that piece goes to Baltimore County. And so that's why if we were to wait to send you money, like you wouldn't have the cash flow that you need. So because we do these quarterly disbursements, we have to hold a little bit back and then we reconcile at the end of the year.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot, I'm just trying to understand it a little better.
I
So, and that's the case, that's fantastic, but it seems like it keeps growing. So is it, so that a portion of this 147 million, so we're going to get a large portion of that back this next year?
And it keeps growing because every year we take in more money as a state.
Okay.
So we have to hold a little bit more back because, the percentage is still relatively the same that we're holding back. But our economy is growing and people are paying more in taxes every year. So the dollar figure is growing too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may have some more questions. Hopefully, I can reach
Yeah,
out
just let
to
us
Eve.
know.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Mr. Guthrie?
Just a couple of questions. I just saw recently, I just heard this report at my community council meeting last night. I saw from this recent budget you went through in this earlier this year, they're just closed, that Harford County got about $33,500,000, and then it was a list of about 10 different places that the 33 million, doesn't matter what they are, but what they went to. How does it determine, like, these 10 items that this $33 million was paid out to? Who makes that determination?
Are you talking about the state budget, or are you talking about, okay, is that what you mean, the
Capital
state budget?
budget, yeah.
The capital budget. So the Office of the Comptroller doesn't write the budget. The governor does, and the General Assembly. So we collect all the money, and we do the state revenue estimates, right? Robbie and his team, or Mr. Sandless and his team, they do the county revenue estimate. We do the state revenue estimate, so we tell the state what we think they have to spend. We have something called the Capital Debt Affordability Committee, which I sit on, and that committee tells the state, here's the amount of capital money that you can spend this year. You know, here are the bonds we can float and et cetera. And then the governor puts forward a capital budget. He has an operating budget and a capital budget. Puts forward the capital budget, and the General Assembly can say, yeah, we don't like that project. We're going to add this project, or we're going to add to that project, or we're going to cut that project entirely, and we're going to add something else. So the General Assembly does that, and then they pass it, you know, before I think it's like 2 or 3 weeks before session ends. So the General Assembly and the governor decide where the capital money goes, but our office does not get to decide that. So I can't tell you how they decided that. I will say, you know, you are part of that, right? You have General Assembly members, and so they play a key role in that work.
They decide, or they
Yep.
do what they can to put their amendments in or whatever to try to
Exactly.
get their piece of the action.
Exactly. And, you know,
Figured.
that can be local bond initiatives, where you can get a couple $100,000 for a park or a nonprofit building, or, you know, something like that. So definitely encourage you to work with your state senators, delegates, to make sure that they know what your priorities are for the district, and bring them along to your community groups or areas to say, hey, we really need, this is a capital project that's ready to go, right? And so they can put in a local bond initiative. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, hopefully they won't.
Thank you,
all be
Mr.
mad
Guthrie.
at that.
Mr. Giangiordano?
So welcome to Bel Air.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
So hope you had a great day.
I did.
Well, that's good, and thanks for stopping in
I brought
today.
the rain too. Aren't you happy?
Yes.
We need rain.
Yes.
Not enough rain.
Yeah.
You did a great analogy. Councilman Penman asked a good question. I think we were trying to figure that out a while ago, so that was a good. Only one issue. She's not moving from Harford County to Baltimore County.
I know.
That's not going to happen.
I know.
So-
I was like, maybe going to Cecil would be even worse, so I said Baltimore. I wasn't sure. Yeah.
So, couple questions. Digital ads tax, how does that get calculated? Does it get calculated on where the business is located, or where the vendor is billing you from? And how much have we collected so far?
That's a great question. So we have not collected, I used to know this because we just were in the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago on this. So for those of you who don't know, the digital ad gross revenue tax was passed by the General Assembly several years ago. So the first of its kind in the country. The idea is that we tax the digital ads that, you know, companies like Facebook are showing us, right, or Comcast, you know, big companies, not the small mom and pop ones. So it's supposed to be based on, I'm going to get it wrong, and I'll follow up if I'm wrong, so you guys have all the information. But first of all, it's only for companies that are over a certain dollar figure. So they're the large companies, which I think we had to amend and fix and stuff. We have taken in, I want to say, tens of millions, but we were sued. So Comcast sued, saying that this was unconstitutional. But rather than file in tax court, which is where usually tax questions go, they filed in the normal court. So district court, circuit court, appellate court found in favor of Comcast, and it went up to the Supreme Court. It's the first time I've ever been the defendant in a case. It was really exciting. Never been the defendant before because since I'm the tax collector, any tax cases, the comptroller is the defendant. So we were in the Maryland Supreme Court a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago. And the Supreme Court actually agreed with the Office of the Comptroller and the Attorney General and threw the case out on procedural grounds and said, no, Comcast, like, you don't get to bypass tax court. You have to go to tax court. So now what happens, because the circuit court and appellate court had said that it was unconstitutional, we weren't actively collecting. Like, you could voluntarily, if you were a company that owed it, you could voluntarily pay. But we weren't going out and auditing companies and saying, hey, you owe us this money, right? And we even said, if you want a refund, you know, you've already paid, we'll issue you a refund. And so some companies came and got refunds as well. So right when the Supreme Court then made their decision, then it became legal for us to collect and to tell those companies, this is how much you owe. So I haven't had a report since the Supreme Court case on how much money has come in, but we can get that report and send it to you.
And where does it go to? General fund?
Sorry?
Where does it go to, the general fund?
The general fund and the blueprint.
Okay.
So it's, you know, it was really passed to help support the blueprint from the education bill. But yes, it goes to the general fund and the blueprint.
And then my other question is, whatever happened with the suspending the enforcement of the craft alcohol carryout beer that Francho was that there was that big issue with the craft breweries a couple years ago? I don't remember seeing a resolution to that, and where does that stand now with, because we've just lost 3 breweries, two of them are craft breweries, and I got a feeling it could spiral into more, and I don't know if that has anything, that's why I figured I'd ask you, because that was an issue with Francho before and
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So the issue with carryout got resolved before Guinness came. So they amended the law, and then we amended it again to make sure that Guinness could be here, frankly, and to support breweries and wineries and distilleries. And then there was a law during the pandemic, right, that you could do carryout at restaurants and you could drink. So that became a permanent law, but it's up to the counties, basically. So the state has allowed it, but counties have to decide what they want their the decision in their localities to be. You know, we no longer run the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, which is the enforcement agency. That's now a different agent. It's its own independent agency, and it's actually now the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission because they're going to enforce cannabis. But we're still the taxing authority. So we work really closely with our breweries, our distilleries, our wineries, and soon our cannabis companies to make sure they understand the tax forms that they have to fill out. They're pretty complicated. So recently we've been partnering with some of our breweries and wineries and distilleries, and we've created how-to videos. And we're doing webinars as well with all of them so that they can join and we can go over all the issues. And we're also trying, so those are sort of short-term fixes, but we're also working with them to identify the ways that that our regulations and our state statutes, you know, why they make it so complicated to file. We're just totally different than the federal government, and the feds, it's so much simpler. And so we want to really see if there's anything we can do to simplify the tax forms too, which is another way to say, hey, breweries, you know, we want you to stay. We're trying to make it simpler to deal with the government here.
Great. And last question, tax rate on cannabis, same as alcohol?
No, it's 9%, much lower.
Well, no, alcohol's 9% when you go in a,
9%.
when you go in a restaurant.
But they have an excise tax too, and cannabis won't. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. 9%.
Thank you, Mr. Giangiordano. Anyone else? Mr. Pittman?
Just my citizen budget advisor over here, can I get your information for him just to follow up later on? Thank you.
And we have cards, so we can leave some of her cards and my
Perfect.
cards here as well, and you can grab them on your way out. if
Thank
that
you,
works.
Eve.
That would be perfect, yes.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Just give them to Mr. Kearney. That would
Okay.
be fine.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Bennett?
I just wanted to say thank you, and it's fun to find out we had similar springs, fellow defendant buddies.
We're both in the same building, just a few weeks apart.
Hopefully, we're both one and done, but
Yeah.
just thought I'd share that little coincidence.
That is funny. That is funny. Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
That's funny. Yeah.
I want to thank you for
thank you.
taking time to stop by and see us and visit with us. Look forward to seeing you in the future. And I know you have a busy schedule and a lot you need to run. So.
No, I really appreciate it. I know you guys have a very busy night, so just thanks so much for allowing me a few minutes. And I really do mean it. I hope this is the beginning of the conversation and not the end. And anything we can do to be helpful, I look forward to returning to Harford County often. So thank you.
I will
so
say,
much.
in the
Yeah.
past, the prior comptroller would visit businesses from time to time across the county.
Yep.
Would let the district rep know that they were in town and
Yep.
maybe be able to visit with them. So we would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
If you do come back, or when you come back, I
Yep,
should say.
absolutely, and Eve will make sure to let you know, where I am and who I'm visiting with, and just keep in touch.
We have some big festivals coming up in Harford County.
No, well, I'm a big fan. I used to, last summer, I was able to make it to a few of the Friday nights, First Fridays in Havre de Grace, and yeah, you have a lot of fun. I came to the fair. So we try to make it out, and if there's ever anything that you think, hey, we'd love to have information from the Office of the Comptroller, we have a number of really great flyers. Actually, I have some in my purse that I'll leave with him as well. And if you want some of those for your district offices or anything, we can get you materials that you can hand out to your constituents, just like, about tax credits and different things. So just let us know, and we're happy to get you materials. So, thanks.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Agenda item number 4, presentation of proclamations, we have none. 5, consideration of petitions, applications, appointments, and nominations. Council appointment, Harford Living Treasurer, Robert Farrington. Mr. Riley?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. They have a motion for Harford Living Treasurer, Robert Farrington.
You want to make a motion?
I do.
They may have a second.
Second.
It's moved and second to approve the nomination by the Cultural Arts Board for Robert Farrington, Harford Living Treasurer. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Riley, or Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bulsaddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, the nomination is hereby approved. Harford TV Advisory Board, Ms. Sottles?
Council President, I'd like to make a motion to approve the appointment of Louise Anderson for Harford TV Advisory Board.
Thank you. May I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Riley. It's been moved and seconded to approve the new appointment to the Harford TV Advisory Board. Is there any discussion?
Council President?
Mr. Giangiordano?
Just want to clarify, it said Verizon representative. I don't know if that matters or not.
It does. Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bulsaddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, the appointment is hereby approved. Executive appointments, Harford County Public Library Board of Trustees, Ms. Sottles.
Council President, I'd like to make a motion to approve the new appointment of James Michael Woods and the reappointments of Dr. William B. Allen, Terrence Flannery, and the student appointment of Ava Holloway for
second?
the Harford County Public Library Board of Trustees.
Thank you. May I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Riley. It's moved and seconded to approve the new appointment and reappointments and the student appointment to the Board of Trustees. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bulsaddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, the appointments are hereby approved. Are any of the individuals in the chambers this evening? All right. Human Relations Commission, may I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve student member Laura Suhal.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. It's been moved and seconded to approve the appointment to the Human Relations Commission. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Boldsaddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, the appointment is hereby approved. Ah. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Agenda item number 7, approval of minutes, legislative day 23-018, May 30, 2023. Are there any corrections to the minutes? There being no corrections, the minutes stand approved. Mr. Giangiordano, please read Resolution 035-23 into the record for introduction.
Resolution 035-23, Performance and Operational Audits Fiscal Year 2024, introduced by Council President Vincenti. A resolution authorizing the county auditor to conduct operational and performance auditing procedures included in the fiscal year 2024 annual audit plan.
Good evening, Ms. Brooks. Thanks for coming.
Sure. Good evening. So you all have in front of you Resolution 35-23. It is the audit plan for the next fiscal year. This is something we do every year to make sure that you all know what we're planning to review, but also so that it's been formally noted that we are authorized to do the performance auditing procedures that are needed. This is a risk-based audit plan, and so me and staff in my office go through and figure out what are all the county's business processes to figure out how likely is it that something will go wrong in one of those processes, and also how big of a deal would it be. So once we've quantified the likelihood and significance of a problem in any given business process, we basically go down the list and say, well, which of these projects do we need to look at this year? How recently have we looked at this process? And also, what are the concerns of our constituents? So in that case, our constituents are you all as council members. We also meet with the county executive to find out what his priorities are to make sure that those have been factored into our overall risk assessment. So once we do that, we essentially come up with this plan. Looking at it, a lot of these are projects that we have done in prior years and are projects that we do every year. So you'll see in there an audit of property management controls, accounts payable, Parks and Recreation inventory controls, facility access controls, cable franchise fees, Harford Transit's cash receipts, employee separation, building permits, building inspections and permits, billing and collection related to those. We also want to look at EMS billing in the next year. Some of the projects that we do every year are things like making sure the financial statement audit gets done. We look at petty cash every year. We follow up on our prior findings to see whether or not those recommendations have been implemented. We do budget analysis and fiscal notes for you all throughout the year. So our audit plan includes time for all of those things, along with also things like time off, also training for our staff. We also save some time for unanticipated projects because sometimes things come up that are really high priority. So we do have time in our budget for those things. There's a fiscal impact note that goes along with this resolution. You'll probably see that next week, but essentially there's no fiscal impact to the resolution just because it's inherent in the budget for our office. So that's what our audit plan looks like, and I can certainly answer any questions that you all have about it.
Council, anyone with any questions? Mr. Giangiordano.
Crystal, good evening. I just want to thank you for all your hard work, dedication, support. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for saving me a couple times. It definitely was. So all these audits that you do, I know comes in handy when we need that. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Giangiordano. Mr. Penman.
Crystal, I just want to echo what Tony had said. I'm a frequent flyer at your office. I appreciate all the work and your staff does and how responsive you are. So it helps me just try to understand everything. So thank you so much for your hard work.
Anyone else? And I would echo the same sentiments, you know, and it's so funny because sometimes when he does get out over his skis a little bit, his phone beeps and you're right there. Even though you're not in the chambers, you're listening to every meeting, every word, and we appreciate the service that you provide, not only us, but the citizens of the county.
Yes.
So thank you. And council, we're going to hold this till next meeting as well and vote on that plan as well. So thank you for your presentation. Agenda item number 9, introduction of bills. We have none. Introduction and consideration of amendments. Mr. Vice President, please read amendments to Bill 23-011.
Amendments to Bill 23-011, Apartments, B3 General Business District. Amendments introduced by Councilmember Penman. Amendment number 1, on page 2, strike beginning with the in line 2 down through districts in line 3 and substitute the R4 zoning district in the B3 zoning district, restricted solely to being located in a mixed-use center special development pursuant to 267-76. Amendment number 2, on page 2, after line 19, insert C, parentheses, quotation C, notwithstanding any provision of this code, to the contrary, garden and mid-rise apartments shall be principally permitted in the B3 zoning district, provided that the apartments are part of a mixed-use center pursuant to the provisions of 267-76 or are adjacent to the property developed as commercial retail containing an excess of 50,000 square feet.
And Mr. Giangiordano, that funny little symbol means section. So it's just section 267.
On amendment number 3, on page 4 and 5, strike beginning with and in line 16 on page 4 down through reference in line 1 on page 5, and substitute and be it further enacted that attachment A, 267, attachment 19-19:12 of the permitted use chart is amended as provided therein as incorporated herein by reference. Amendment number 4, chart referenced in amendment number 3. Amendment number 5, on page 5, strike beginning with and in line 2, down through reference in line 6, and substitute, and be it further enacted that the attachment B, table 59-3 of the design requirements for specified uses, B3, specific uses, B3, General Business District, is amended as provided therein and is incorporated herein by reference. Amendment number 6, chart referenced in amendment number 5. Amendment number 7, on the title page, strike beginning with 2 on line 4 down through 267-76 in line 7, inclusive, and substitute to restrict garden apartments and mid-rise apartments and the B3 General Business District to only apartments which are either part of a mixed-use center pursuant to the provisions of Section 267-76 or are adjacent to the property developed as commercial retail which is in excess of 50,000 square feet. Amendment number 8, on the title page in line 8, strike to eliminate the row labeled apartments from the table and substitute to show apartments are subject to the limitations in Section 267-73. Amendment number 9,
74, sir.
Section 267-74. Amendment number 9, on the title page in the 11th line, strike unless being undertaken pursuant to an approved mixed-use development plan and substitute subject to certain expectations. Exceptions.
Thank you, Mr. Giangiordano. And again, these amendments will be considered at a future meeting. Amendments 1 through 16 to Bill 23-013 have been set aside this evening. Today, we noticed some things that need to be looked at, so we're holding that back. I'd like to move to amendments to Bill 23-014, Annual Appropriation Ordinance. Ms. Spence, Mr. Sandless. Council, may I have general consent to move forward and vote on these amendments in blocks like you have before you? Thank you.
Good evening, Council President and council members. I'll go right into voting block 1. Amendments number 1 and 2. This is to reallocate funds from Human Resources Personnel Matters in the amount of $750,000 and provide to the Health Department to support environmental health services.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve voting block 1?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 1 containing amendments 1 and 2.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. It's moved and second to approve voting block 1. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados? Aye. Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 1 is hereby approved. Ms. Spence?
Voting block 2 are amendments 3 through 7, and this is to reallocate funds from the Office of the County Executive in the amount of $43,538 and the Director of Administration in the amount of $43,537. This is to increase funding to Harford Center in the amount of $7,470 and the ARC Northern Chesapeake Region in the amount of $7,630. And to Housing and Community Development in the amount of $71,975, and this is to restore grant and aid funds to the FY23 appropriation levels.
Thank you, Ms. Spence. May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 2 containing amendments 3 through 7.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. It's moved and second to approve voting block 2. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados? Aye. Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 2 is hereby approved. Ms. Spence?
Voting block number 3 are amendments 8 through 10. This is to reallocate funds from a vacant position within Community Services, the Director of Community Services, in the amount of $101,859, and from a vacant position within Planning and Zoning, the Director of Planning and Zoning, in the amount of $89,443 to provide for marketing staff within Office of Economic Development.
Thank you. May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 3 containing amendments 8 through 10.
Have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. It's moved and second to approve voting block 3. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 3 is hereby approved.
Voting block number 4, amendments 11 and 12. This is to increase the fund balance appropriated in the amount of $10 million to increase Board of Education instructional salaries to support teacher salaries and classrooms.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 4 containing amendments 11 and 12.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. It's moved and second to approve voting block 4. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative and 0 in the negative, voting block 4 is hereby approved.
Voting block number 5 are amendments 13 and 14. This is to increase fund balance appropriated in the amount of $150,000 to increase the Sheriff's Office administration to provide salary funds for 2 victim witness advocates.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 5 containing amendments 13 and 14.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie.
Speak up.
It's moved and seconded to approve voting block 5. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 5 is hereby approved.
Voting Block 6, Amendments 15 and 16. This is to increase fund balance appropriated in the amount of $410,000 to increase the Office of the State's Attorney to provide additional salary funds.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 6 containing amendments 15 and 16.
May I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Soddles? Been moved and seconded to approve voting block 6. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President,
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie.
Aye.
Mr. Penman.
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano.
Aye.
Mr. Riley.
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 6 is hereby approved.
Voting Block number 7, this is for the capital budget. This is to increase federal ARPA funds in the amount of $2,250,000 to provide for a match for the state broadband grants on the broadband infrastructure capital project, and that is Amendments 17 and 18.
May I have a motion, please?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 7 containing amendments 17 and 18.
May I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Penman? It's moved and second to approve voting block 7. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie.
Aye.
Mr. Penman.
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano.
Aye.
Mr. Riley.
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 7 is hereby approved.
Voting Block 8, Amendments 19 and 20. This is to increase state funds for the library's capital project, the Bel Air Library renovations, in the amount of $3,607,000. You will also note there will be a memorandum of change that follows this, memorandum of change number 5.
May I have a motion, please?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 8 containing amendments 19 and 20.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Soddles. It's moved and second to approve voting block 8. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie.
Aye.
Mr. Penman.
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano.
Aye.
Mr. Riley.
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 8 is hereby approved.
Voting Block number 9, Amendments 21 and 22. This is to increase state program open space funding in the amount of $400,000 to provide the appropriation authority to accept the additional funding and allocate it to the Parks and Recreation Park Land Acquisition Capital Project.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 9 containing amendments 21 and 22.
Second.
Second. Mr. Guthrie? It's moved and second to approve voting block 9. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie.
Aye.
Mr. Penman.
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano.
Aye.
Mr. Riley.
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 9 is approved.
Voting Block 10, Amendments 23 and 24. This is to increase other funds in the amount of $3 million to provide appropriation authority to accept from a contributor or benefactor to create a new Parks and Rec capital project, Cedar Lane Park improvements.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 10 containing amendments 23 and 24.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. It's moved and seconded to approve voting block 10. Is there any discussion? Mr. Giangiordano.
I'd just like to say that's a tremendous gift from somebody, Cedar Lane Park. I know that's a jewel in our recreation. We really needed that, so I look forward to see some more improvements at Cedar Day Park, and I certainly do appreciate whoever gave that donation and just wanted to make sure they knew we were looking. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie.
Aye.
Mr. Penman.
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano.
Aye.
Mr. Riley.
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
Being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 10 is hereby approved.
Voting Block 11, Amendments 25 through 36. This is to correct various water and sewer capital projects, removing the funding source of prior bonds and replacing it with investment income. This is necessary to correct the amount of appropriated prior bonds to what is actually available. So the total amount of investment income that we're replacing it, the prior bonds with, is $402,854.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 11 containing amendments 25 through 36.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. It's moved and seconded to approve voting block 11. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Jan Giordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bull Saddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 11 is hereby approved.
Voting Block 12, Amendments 37 through 58, at the request of the Board of Education and as approved by the County Council on Legislative Session Day 2316. These amendments are to reallocate Harford County Public Schools fund balance to various Board of Education capital projects for a total amount of $20,681,642.
Have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve voting block 12 containing amendments 37 through 58.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. It's moved and seconded to approve voting block 12. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Jan Giordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bull Saddles? Aye. Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, voting block 12 is hereby approved. Council, for consideration tonight, we have 5 memorandums of change to Resolution 025-23, Capital Improvement Program. First memorandum of change is Resolution 025, Capital Improvement. May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve memorandum of change number 1.
May I have a second?
Second.
It's moved and second to approve memorandum of change 1. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Jan Giordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bull Saddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, memorandum of change number 1 is hereby approved. Memorandum of change number 2, may I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve memorandum of change number 2.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. It's moved and second to approve memorandum of change number 2. Is there any discussion? Mr. Jan Giordano?
Do we need to read in what the project is in the memorandum or not?
You can if you like.
Okay, project is athletic and recreation repairs and improvements. The memorandum of change will appropriate $337,000 in PAYGO funding in fiscal year 2025 for the replacement of the outdoor track at Harvard of Grace High School. The fiscal year 24 funds of $337 will be to replace the track at Aberdeen High School.
Is there any other discussion?
37,000.
Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Jan Giordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bull Saddles?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, memorandum of change 2 is hereby approved. Memorandum of change 3, you want to read it in?
Yes, sir. Resolution 25-23, capital program fiscal years 2024 through 2029, Parks and Rec Cedar Lane Park improvements. This memorandum of change will add the Cedar Lane Park improvements capital project to the fiscal year 24 capital improvement plan and appropriate $1,500,000 in other private donations in fiscal year 2025.
May I have a motion?
Council President, I move to approve memorandum of change number 3.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. It's moved to second to approve memorandum of change number 3. Mr. Jan Giordano.
So again, I just like to make sure that I recognize the private donation of $1,500,000 to Cedar Day Park.
Cedar Lane.
Cedar Lane Park. I think that's now $4.5 million in donations. So I know everybody's very appreciative of that. I want to make sure that it's recorded out there, and we certainly do, the citizens of Harford County certainly appreciate that. So thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, memorandum of change 3 is hereby approved. Memorandum of change 4, Mr. Giangiordano.
I'd also like to read this in Resolution 025-23, Capital Program Fiscal Years 2024 to 2029, Parks and Rec, Joppatown, Joppa Community Center. This memorandum of change renames the Joppatown Youth Center to the Joppatown Community Center and will move fiscal year 2026 future bond funding in the amount of $2 million and the fiscal year 2029 future bond funding in the amount of $7 million to fiscal year 2025 for the Joppatown Community Center capital project.
May I have a motion, please?
Council President, I move to approve memorandum of change 4.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. It's moved and seconded to approve memorandum of change 4. Is there any discussion? Mr. Guthrie?
Yes, it's just that it's been a long time coming. I appreciate all the hard work's been done, not only by this council, but the county executive to get this to where it is. It's moving it up 5 years closer to us from fiscal 2029, and then it's, you know, how those out years work. It doesn't really mean it's going to happen in the out years. As you get closer to them, the out years go further out. So I really appreciate this, moving us up into the 23-24 period, 25. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Penman?
I just want to commend Councilman Guthrie for his advocacy on this. I know he's been on this in his community groups and with the Parks and Rec. Terry can contest to that. So good job on that, on getting this moved up.
Thank you.
Mr. Giangiordano?
So I also like to commend Mr. Guthrie, and glad he was able to come back on this council and be able to push this forward. Without him, this would not have gotten done. So it's just a testament to having somebody come back and work on something that didn't get done. So thank you, Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
I'm sorry.
Council President, I move
We
to...
do have a motion, and we did have a second.
Did, because I seconded.
I think I zoned out for a second.
Mr. Kearney, I love it when you're out of line. I love that. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, you're holding up the vote.
Ms.
Been
Dixon?
30 years waiting for this vote. I want to get it in.
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye, aye, aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, memorandum of change 4 is hereby approved.
Thank you, council.
Memorandum of change 5.
Council President, I move to approve memorandum of change 5.
May I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Stiles, thank you. It's moved and second to approve memorandum of change 5. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
Yeah,
No,
you got
I
the-
got my hand up.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
That's okay.
Mr. Giangiordano?
I just want to thank Mary Hassler, the head of Harford County Public Libraries, for using some of her funds to get this project changed at the Bel Air Library. So again, I just want to thank her for that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Dixon?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Penman?
Aye.
Mr. Giangiordano?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolsados?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, memorandum of change 5 is hereby approved. I would like to take a minute to thank both of you thus far for your efforts on this budget. I want you to deliver a message back to the county executive and tell him that we appreciate the efforts that he's put forth to look at the concerns that this council's had and listen and find the wherewithal to take care of them. We still have 1 or 2 things that we're questioning, and we hope that he continues to keep an open mind and as we move forward. But thank you for all your efforts. The Agenda number 11 obviously will be held, the Bill 23-013, until next week. Number 12, enrollment of bills, we have none. 13, unfinished business, we have none. 14, new business, Board of Education, Harford County. Ms. Judd? Mr. Clark? Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Each year, we review our state categories as we're spending throughout the year, and at the end of the third quarter, we do a projection through the end of the year to determine which state categories we may be overspent in. That happens from time to time, depending on unforeseen circumstances that occur during the year. So we are here before you this evening to request approval to make the intercategory transfers. I believe you all have a copy. Mr. Clark's going to walk through those details with you, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Good evening, President Vincenti and council members. Like Ms. Judd said, when we file our budget with the Maryland State Department of Education, it is within state category, and we are not allowed to spend over in those particular.
What, Mike? Oh.
I'm sorry, I'll start over.
There you go.
I didn't think I was being loud enough. President Vincenti, thank you, and council members, thank you for having us here tonight. When we file our budget with the Maryland State Department of Education, it is by state category, and we are not allowed to spend over in those state categories without coming before the council, actually the Board of Education first, then the council, to get approval to move money around between those state categories. So this is not a request for additional funding. This is just a request to move funding between those 14 different state categories. So I'm going to go through, and we're requesting really 7 categories, and we're projecting at this point that they're either going to be over or very, very close. So we would like to put a little bit of funding in there just in case. There are, as Ms. Judd said, some unforeseen expenditures through June 30. The first one is instructional salaries. Right now, we're projecting that that category will be over about $1.5 million. We are requesting a transfer of $3 million into that state category 103. Category special education, we're projecting that to be very, very close, right about $83,000 to the good right now. It's about a $52 million category. So we're requesting $500,000 to be transferred into special education, state category 106. Health services, again, that one is very, very close. We're right on the edge of being either right at zero or maybe a couple thousand over. We're requesting $200,000 be put into state category 108, health services. Transportation, we're projecting right now to be over, just over $500,000. We are asking for a transfer of $1 million to be put into state category 109, transportation. The next 3 on your sheet are really utilities. State category 110, we're asking for $1 million to be added to our electricity account, $1.5 million to natural gas, and $500,000 to oil. We're projecting to be over, just over $2 million in utilities. As you probably know from your home and those of you that have businesses, we've seen an increase in our utilities costs over the year. The next category is 115, capital outlay. We refunded our administrative building last year, and during that process, I didn't move funds from interest to principal. So when we refunded, we dropped the interest rate from, Ms. Judd, 2.4 to 1.7, something like that. So we're paying more principal and less interest. With that whole thing happening in the spring, I neglected to move the money from interest to principal. So we're asking for that $80,000 to be moved at this point. And then the last one is state category 104, instructional supplies and materials. We are asking for $900,000 to be added to our textbook line. That is for a pilot program that the Board of Education approved in May 22nd's Board of Education meeting. The 2 accounts that, well, the one state category, excuse me, is fixed charges. State category 112. Our health insurance, we're asking for $8,600,000 to be spread out between those categories that I just mentioned above, and then debt service interest, a reduction of $80,000, which would be moved into principal. So with that, we would certainly entertain any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, and I want to thank you and Ms. Judd for the time that you came over and visited with myself and I'm sure other council members to bring us up to speed with the transfers. And I do, I understand that this is something that's done on a regular basis. So, Councilman, any questions?
Must have done a good job.
May I have a motion? We're going to consider this tonight, so may I have a motion, please?
Council President, I move to approve the inter-category transfers.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. It's been a second to approve the intercategory transfers this evening. Is there any discussion? Ms. Dixon?
She left.
Oh. Mr. Kearney?
Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. Guthrie.
Aye.
Mr. Penman.
Aye.
Mr. Dan Giordano.
Aye.
Mr. Riley.
Aye.
Ms. Pulsatos.
Aye.
Mr. Bennett.
Aye.
There being 7 votes in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, the request for intercategories transfers are hereby approved.
You're docked.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna cough through that, roll call, Sal.
If I may, I'd like to move to agenda number 17, comments and input from attending citizens. Ms. Dixon, do we have anyone signed up?
We do, Mr. President. We have 5 this evening. John Malamo, followed by Bill Whalen.
Name and address, please.
Mr. Guthrie, well-stated prayer. I would just remind you and your colleagues that Veterans Day is 11 November. We'll be watching. Sir, good evening to you and your colleagues. John P. Malamo, 2402 Eagle View Drive, Bel Air, Maryland. Chapter 3, when the code cannot be ignored, deny it. On 18 January 2017, I requested a public hearing on the Harford County Airport license renewal. Administrative law judge from the Maryland Office of Administrative Hearings was assigned to the case. Among undisputed facts submitted in the administrative law judge's proposed decision, on October 11, 2013, Harford County Airport Owners Group et al. Filed an application seeking a special exception to operate a general aviation airport. Say April 16, 2014, zoning hearing examiner recommended that the request for special exception be granted. 16 September 2014, the Zoning Board of Appeals rendered a final decision ratifying and adopting its own, the zoning hearing examiner's final decision. On 14 April 2015, the Circuit Court of Harford County issued a written opinion and order which affirmed the final decision of the Harford County Council Board of Appeals. March 1st, 2017, the Harford County Department of Planning and Zoning conducted a review of the zoning status of the Harford County Airport and sent a letter with their findings to Kevin Hess, Airport Manager for the Harford County Airport. In that correspondence dated 1 March 2017, Mr. Milton D. Davenport stated, "The Harford Airport is recognized as an existing, non-conforming use that has been in continuous operation as a general aviation airport since 1941. As of the date of this letter, there are no known zoning violations or citations on this property." And among the administrative law judge's findings/analysis, Bradley F. Killian, the director of Harford County Department of Planning and Zoning, exercised his authority when he determined that the Harford County Airport has been granted all land use approvals required to permit the renewal of its license, and jurisdiction of the MAA under Section 5-204 of the Transportation Article of the Maryland Annotated Code does not include the independent determination by the MAA of local zoning issues. It is the local governing body that issues airport land use approval. And on 23 May 2016, an MAA representative personally contacted the Department of Planning and Zoning, Mr. Anthony McClune, to confirm that land use approval for the Harford County Airport remained valid. Now I wonder, who gave Mr. Davenport authority and discretion to reverse the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals, the written opinion and order of the Circuit Court of Harford County? Gentlemen, ma'am, that is not a rhetorical question. That's serious. It's time when you look at it and you say, this is an F-bomb, fraud, or the C word, corrupt. If any of you need any documentation to substantiate my comments, please do contact me. If any of you believe that my statements are not true, contact me with facts. Good night.
Call your next speaker.
Bill Wayland, followed by Janine LaCour.
Good evening, sir. Name and address again, please.
Again, Bill Whalen, 415 Cedar Springs Road, Bel Air, Maryland. On May 27th, I sent each council member an email recommending legislative amendments to the zoning code. It's to clarify and define the powers and duty of the Board of Appeals, which is the county council, and the administration, mainly the director of planning. Presently, the language in the code is subject to one's interpretation as to enforcement authority, which has caused past legal problems. I wish to thank Mr. Raleigh and Ms. Boyle DeSatos for the courtesy of responding to my email and to look further into the matter. I do not intend to go into details of my email because of time limit, but I want to make several points that I discussed. It's not a new topic to the administration or council. The law department has interpreted the zoning code that the Board of Appeals does not have any enforcement authority. The executive branch is not obligated to enforce final decisions of the Board of Appeals, and pursuit of enforcement actions are a policy left to the discretion of the executive branch. This is not defined anywhere in the Harford County Code, Charter, or Zoning Code. I believe the Board of Appeals has enforcement authority. There have been some zoning cases where the Director of Planning does nothing to enforce the decision when it's been proven by finding of fact and conclusions of law that the Director of Planning made an obvious error in his or her final determination. This is a violation of law. Director cannot be judge, jury, and executioner. I do not believe the intent of the code provides complete control of the land use and zoning decisions to the executive branch. If so, there's no need for a Board of Appeals. Bill 23023, civil penalties, was introduced on May 9th as an action to enforce the zoning code through issuance and enforcement of a civil citation. It only provides for a county department director or authorized designee complete authority and or discretion to impose a fine and issue citations. There is no recognition in the legal status of the Board of Appeals, their decisions and enforcement. That bill is the subject of the public hearing next week, and it needs to be amended. I wrote a letter to Mr. Blomquist on May 11th. Mr. Vincetti, you got a copy as well. And I also copied the administrative leaders on the same subject matter as related to case 5922. I requested the opportunity to have a phone discussion, a very polite letter. To date, no one has responded. In conclusion, I recommend cognizant executive, legislative personnel, and I said this to Mr. Blomquist, meet in July or August to resolve the matter. Modify the code to remove the ambiguity and make it perfectly clear as to the exact power and authority as it relates to zoning decisions and enforcement. This will prevent future issues and unnecessary costs to taxpayers, which has occurred in the past. Thank you, and I'd like to leave a copy with Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Janine LaCour, 1820 Park Beach Drive in Perryman. And I sent some information to you today, and just want to comment to a few of those pieces in that. And basically, as a concerned citizen in the Perryman community, we just have a history of actions simply not being implemented, and it's just continuing to happen over and over again. In one of the Baltimore Sun article in 2001 said it succinctly, and we're still experiencing today. Herein lies the Perryman problem for the county, state, and community. The state can't afford the roads, which cost at least $150 million to accommodate that scale of growth, and we're still dealing with that today, and that article was 2001. In 2003, the Bush River Watershed Management Plan was put forth for the Harford County Department of Public Works. That was not implemented. In 2006, Poplar Hill, which was one of the most important buildings in Harford County. From a historic preservation standpoint, that building was allowed to be demolished for the sake of improvement as a large freight distribution terminal. In 2007, the Harford County Rural Villages Study, which was prepared by the Harford County Department of Planning and Zoning, designated 9 rural villages in the county. All of those villages are located in Churchville or northward. There are no community rural villages, even though the Perryman area has been designated as a historic district and was eligible in 1993. Again, not implemented. And also, as we were hearing earlier from the Parks and Rec and about Harford Next, in the 2016, the 2016 report for Harford Next, one of the stated goals was to concentrate preserved land in relatively contiguous blocks. And obviously, we have huge contiguous blocks in the Perryman Peninsula that are simply being ignored relative to preservation. I'd also like, I'd be very curious about the status of Partners Field, which is in the Perryman Peninsula. My calls to the Harford County Parks and Rec Department, as well as the local business that has designated that park. No one knows the park even exists. It's not listed on the Harford County Parks and Rec site. So while that park was implemented, it's no longer implemented, and it seems to have disappeared, that we can see that land. Again, we have continued safety concerns on the roads in our community, and we have the Spazusha in 2022, Spazusha Road Vehicle Height Monitoring System. That has not been implemented. And again, Perryman Peninsula is below the county in median income. The 18% of the Perryman families live in poverty, and the people of color in the community is more than double that of Harford County. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Greg LaCour, followed by Ron Stuczynski.
Good evening, sir. Name and address.
Greg LaCour, 1820 Park Beach Drive. I want to take a different angle on this. Mr. Malama just left. He doesn't deserve any reply from you all later on. You all have done nothing wrong. You all stand up for our servicemen, EMS, everybody. The respect that you show to the United States with the saying of the national anthem each and every time. We know who you are. I don't know what that man is doing, and please, on the lighter side, he is not part of 3P. We do not condone him. Now, I'm going to go back to something that, now that the budget is settled, I wanted to bring up Welcome One, just to make sure that it is on your mind. I did ask you to look into some buses, just to help these people. I was over there again the last couple of weeks. They still have the same problem. They get out around 7 a.m. They have nowhere to go and no place, and no one's helping them. So if we could look into this, and I'm not just saying drop them off in any corner, bring them to where we can help these people, whether, it's the Klein Crisis Center. Is it, getting up to Social Security? Is it unemployment? Where is it? Let's just help. You know what I'm saying with that. So please, just on that, Ed, I know you did a lot of work on the budget, but please don't forget about these people. They need your help.
I'll call you tomorrow.
Ron's not here.
Okay. Anyone else?
There's no one else signed up, Mr. President.
Thank you. Agenda item number 16, council members. Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank the council overall for the help with the community center that we're now going to, looks like we're going to get and chop it down finally. And also like to thank Tony G. and Aaron Penman for their comments because they were helpful in that process. Last Wednesday, attended the Joppatown High School commencement at the Harford Community College. That we attend a lot of them. They never get old. When you see the youth of our county and what they can do and the education that they get and the amount of, and when they always read off the amount of money they get to go to colleges is always in the millions of dollars that particular class gets. So we're pretty proud of all that. I did tour with Pat Vicente. I toured the Magnolia Elementary School on Friday, mainly just to look at the relocatables, or in their case, they're permanent structures at the Magnolia Elementary School. But just the cost of them, mainly the trailers more than the. Understand that the ones that don't relocate, they're there permanently. I can understand the cost of them, but I always have problems with these relocatables. I had a problem with them when I was on the council before, but there's a lot less. We had 120 of them in, and we were able, after all the construction and the schools we built and rebuilt, we dropped it. It's down to about 40. But it always gets me when they start talking about how much they cost, like $200,000 a piece, but that don't get me as much as when they have to move one from one school to the other. They bring a truck in, they hook it up, they trail it over to other location, and it costs $88,000 or $82,000 to do that. I said, geez, I'll do it for half that. But I just don't understand why the costs. They always have reasons. I mean, the trailers don't have any bathrooms in them. All this is electric for the most part, and except for the permanent ones, they're not electric. Have bathrooms in them, but the trailers don't. And then they say, well, they got to put it on a concrete pad and all that. I don't know where all the concrete pads went, but they were all there before, and when we had 120 trailers, now we're down to 40. So that's always been an issue for me, and I guess I'll never understand it. Saturday, we had a couple events. I went to a community cleanup at 7:30 Saturday morning at Oak Landing and West Shore. Learned a lot about the area. County Executive Bob Cassie was there, and we walked the entire area. And I'm surprised that all those townhomes back there's about 400 of them, and every one looked better than the other one. They take very good care of their homes there, but we did notice how bad the streets were, and we're going to see if we can do something about getting them repaved. From there, I went at 9 a.m. to Community Center in Edgewood and gave out a proclamation. Jacobs was with me, and we presented them with a proclamation at the for the Gun Violence Awareness Day. It certainly is something that across this country, the gun violence is getting. It's not getting. It is terrible, and there's something we need to do about it nationwide to stop all this killing. Hope it happens in our time period. Had ribbon cutting ceremony at Woodbridge Health Clinic yesterday, and mostly all the council members were there. It was interesting. Glad to go back to these places that I had something to do with when I was on the council before. They're there, and they do a great service to the community, so we're very happy with them. Edgewood, the Joppatown Edgewood Community Advisory Board met last night. Mr. Penman always comes, and we're glad to have him. Our meetings go quite long because they've merged Edgewood and Joppatown into one meeting, so they always run close to 3 hours. But not everybody is there at the end. It starts at the beginning. But it's been interesting trying to put both of these meetings together and under the same roof. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Penman.
Thank you, Mr. President. In honor of D-Day, I do want to thank all those service members that lost their lives in honor of our freedom. Just a quick note also, I had the honor of meeting with the Maryland Classified Employees Association, Chapter 610, which is made up of a wide range of county employees, to learn their needs and process in which they negotiate for wages and benefits. And I believe it's important to advocate for our people in the county and look forward to supporting their organization in the future. With that, that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Mr. Jan Giordano?
Council President, thank you very much. Attended Bel Air graduation where I attended high school, my alma mater. Just a little disappointed I wasn't able to speak. It's been a couple of years. My first year on the council, I was able to address the students, and wish I can do that again. It means a lot to me. So also, I want to congratulate Alex on the grand reopening of Copper Mine Bel Air Athletic Club. It was the same time as Bel Air graduation. I wasn't able to attend that, but my legislative aide, Caitlin, was there. So I want to thank Alex and thank Marge. Marge is the 90-year-old lady who met Alex coming out of the athletic club and said she really needed this club, was part of the community, and that hit home for him. So they put a lot of money into it. Looks great. So if you get a chance, stop in. So I'm glad I'm back as a member. Myself, Councilman Riley, Councilman Penman did a soft opening for Latitude Seafood and the Festival of Bel Air. So congratulations to them, and looking forward to them getting their liquor license and maybe doing something else. Also attended the new facility for reflected images up in Forest Hill. They had a lot of vendors, a lot of high-end cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Aston Martins, out there that he does the custom detailing on that, ceramic coating, everything, so he had quite a big turnout. And then Mana Life Health opening, congratulations for them. And congratulate Justin Naylor for as an Eagle Scout. And finally, I had a ribbon on here tonight, and it fell off, and it was ladybugs. And one of my sister's nurses who took care of my niece Amanda, who died in 2001, she was handicapped, and they took care of her for 10 years. She passed away last week. She had multiple sclerosis. She was a great wife, great mother, great grandmother, and her loss is a little hard to take. So I want to wish her family the best. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Jan Giordano. Mr. Riley?
I want to send out congratulations to two Eagle Scouts over the weekend, James Crow and Odin Woods from Troop 811. Also, thank you to Kevin and Sean, who had an open house at the Harford County Airport, and me and my wife were able to make that. If you can make that next year, it's an excellent day. Also, want to let the folks know in District D that they're going to replace the bridge over Maryland 161 over Deer Creek, so be on the lookout for them closing that bridge down. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Ms. Sottles?
Thank you. While I'm pleased to see negotiation and compromise in the operating budget, I would like to reiterate my displeasure that the Harford County Sheriff's Office Central Precinct and Training Center has been cut. Despite past promises, it would be built, and this county has already committed funds and put out bonds for the project. It's vital to the citizens in my district, but the county as a whole. And I ran my campaign on public safety, and I'll continue to advocate for this training center. And with that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sottles. Mr. Bennett?
Hello. It was a very busy week. Got to go to the grand opening of TechSax Technologies. I was there with Council President Vincenti's wife and with Councilman Tony G, and that was a lot of fun. And it was a great event. I also got to go to the welcome reception for the Pride of Baltimore 2, which came to Havre Grace, and it was a lot of fun to meet the crew and hear their stories, and also get to go see the boat. And I think I'm supposed to call it a ship. I don't want to be rude to the ship by calling it a boat. But it was that was also a lot of fun. Havre Grace High School had its graduation, which was a wonderful ceremony. I got to see so many big siblings of former students, neighbors, and that was a lot of fun. Then we had First Fridays, which was also enjoyable. You know, last month we had a motorcycle at First Fridays. This month we had the Pride of Baltimore. So I did ask the mayor, what is it going to be, an airplane in July? You know, what's going to be the mode of transportation that shows up? Waiting to find that out. Then Saturday was very busy. Went to the Moms Demand Action Community Cleanup, wearing orange with Councilman Guthrie, and celebrated their efforts in our community. And, you know, it's just wonderful how many volunteers come out and support their work. I also went to the AFSCME 67's meeting on Saturday morning. AFSCME 67 represents our school systems employees who are non-instructional staff. So that would be our cafeteria workers, our custodial staff, our maintenance workers, our bus drivers, and just to speak with them and know their need and know, you know, their struggles. It was an important and tough conversation. And then ran off. This Saturday I had 3 outfit changes. To the Wade In Festival at the Estuary Center, where we literally waded in. Abby and I stood in the water, got to speak about the importance of getting out and feeling your, you know, your environment, knowing your environment outside of a textbook, but in your hands, in between your toes, to make it personal so that it's no different than taking care of yourself when you take care of your environment. And so that was a great event. And then finished the day, and this is where one of those outfit changes came in because I didn't want to make the Eagle Scout ceremony soggy with my wade-in clothes. We got to go to Justin's Eagle Scout ceremony with Troop 313. You know, it's outside my district, but as an Eagle Scout myself, 10-year anniversary this year of that. I just always think it's important to celebrate just the amount of work it takes to get there. You know, it's just an incredible feat. Justin did it a lot faster than I did because my Eagle Scout ceremony came 2 days before my 18th birthday. You can only imagine that, you know, that's why my dad has gray hair. But that's everything we've been up to. I just want to make sure everybody knows that next weekend is the Magic of Science Fair and Festival. It's an opportunity to see a lot of our students in the community who opted in to do something beyond their school day and prepare a science project in a competition and also enjoy the science fair itself. One of my students is in the competition, which is really neat. But it should be a fun opportunity for all families to partake in and enjoy something on a Saturday. That's everything for me.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. 15, business from the president. I have to advertise the adequate public facilities meeting again, June 21st, 4:30 p.m., second floor council conference room. It is open to the public. And then I just want to make a couple of quick comments, obviously on graduations. We attended every graduation in the county. Amongst everything else that we do on a daily basis, at some point there was 2 a day. But I was really pleased to see every council member at a graduation at some point in time. They attended as many as they could within their district. And then also, they are limited, I think, to 2 or 3, I think. But I was very pleased. The kids are fantastic. Got to see a tremendous amount of familiar faces that we've watched grow up over the last 7, 8, 9 years and watch them graduate. So it was really, really a pleasure to see that. And then this morning, we had the opportunity to attend Harford Grace High School's governmental breakfast where some of the students had different projects that they had up, asking all sorts of questions about either term limits or other things. So environment, climate control, different projects like that. So that was very well attended, and I was pleased to be there. And with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you all.